or even organs of animals or humans by larvae of diphtheric flies, just flies. And I said they can be categorized into different groups or different types. We have the gastrointestinal, which is the most common one is gastrophilus. That's this bud. And that you see in the stomach and the intestine. But then the most common version is the cutaneous, in which you see it, the forms can be called furuncular or just cutaneous. And I'm mentioning some of the examples that cause this. One of them is Cordylobia, which is the mango fly or the tumbu fly. Now, this, as I said, is very common in many African countries. But this is very common also here in the United States. And this is Cuterebra. It's very common in squirrels and also in cats. All right? Then, oh, this is not working. Sorry. Okay. All right. Okay. So we also have the nasopharyngeal, which is the type that goes into the nasal sinus and sometimes can actually get into the frontal sinus. And then you start seeing some nervous signs, all right? This is caused by Estrus ovis. You see it mainly in sheep and goats, and also in cattle in some cases. But then the one that is of concern to us today is the one that is classified under wound myiasis. Now, these are the ones that either can cause wound, which are the primary screwworm myiasis, or those that depend on an existing wound. So if they can cause wound on their own, they are referred to as primary, whereas if they depend on an existing wound and then they just expand the wound, then they are called the secondary. Now, the one that the fly we'll be talking about today falls under the primary because it can cause wound on its own. Now, the fly itself is called Cochleomia omnivorax. That's the cause of the New World Screwworm myiasis. And this is just to tell us a little of the morphology. Now, this is how the fly looks like. They are actually bluish or bluish green. They tend to have variation in colors. Now, the size is usually, if we know our regular housefly, it's usually about 2 or 3 times the size of a housefly. And I bet it with you, if you live in an area where this is endemic, you would have come across it. Because if you have trash, you see flies come around trash, right? Areas where you have a lot of this, you will see them around trash. All right? So they are very common if they are endemic. Now, I said something about the colors. And then the unique thing about the fly itself is the presence of 3 dark bands on the thorax. But as I said, once you see a fly that is big, a little bigger than your regular house fly, and is bluish or is tailoring towards a greenish color, you start suspecting that you're dealing with Cochleomia. There are so many other flies that could look like this, but then this is usually the characteristics. And then you see these orange colored eyes. Then the eggs. The eggs are bright white in color, and they are laid in masses. Okay, so when the flies lay them, they clump up in masses. Now, each one of these are usually rounded posteriorly and tapers anteriorly. Okay, and as I said, they lay them in patterns. There is a description which I didn't get when I was preparing this, but they lay them in patterns. Okay, but everything comes out as a mass, glued together. All right, so this takes me to the larvae, which I tell you, if you have a case that is ongoing, this is most likely what you'll be dealing with, not the adults. Okay, so most of the time you wouldn't come across the adults doing their thing. This is what you'll be dealing with. So it will be important for us to be able to identify this on the farm or on the animal. So these larvae has 3 different stages. As the larval form, they can have 3 different forms within the larval stage. These forms are called instars. The most advanced one, which is the 3rd stage, is this way it is. This way this image looks like. It is usually whitish to cream in color, and then it's cylindrical, tapers anteriorly. This is the anterior portion, so it narrows anteriorly, and the base is a bit wider. Okay? Now, you would notice this, which is usually very unique. Once you see this, you have a very strong, how will I put it, tentative diagnosis of cochleomia. And that is the presence of these two trunks, tracheal trunks. These tracheal trunks emanate from the structure they use for breathing, which is this. The spiracular plates, these are spiracles that terminates as spiracular plates. These are what they use for breathing. Now, this will be important in the next slide, which when we get to the life cycle. Now, if you notice, these trace here are these tracheal trunks. So the tracheal trunks emanate from these spiracular plates. Please note, there are so many bots, so many larvae. All of them, this is like their fingerprint. None, these spiracular plates, the way it looks or the way it's arranged is always unique to each fly. So this is definitely, once you see this, this is cochleomia, all right? Now, but when you go anteriorly, you see two hooks on the mouth. But then one of the major features is that on each segment, you have 1 to 3 rows of spines that goes round, anterior, dorsally and ventrally, goes round each of the segments of the larvae. Now, this is important because so many larvae of bots, of myotic flies, have different morphologies, which helps us to identify them. But as I said, the moment you take one fly and it has this, that is cochleomia. It's that simple. All right, so now let's talk about the life cycle. I will start this from the point of copulation. So we have two flies, the male and the females, which emerge as we go on. You get to know how they emerge. But once they emerge, the males mature within 24 hours, and they are able to mate 5 to 6 times in their lifetime. Okay? However, the females take a much longer time, about 2 to 3 days before they mature. And then the beauty of it, which I think is the saving grace, is that the females only mate once. Once they mate, they have enough to fertilize all the eggs that they produce. So they do not mate the second time, which this will come in, or this, based on what we know now, is the basis for eradication steps that were taken prior to this time. So post-copulation, they go into oviposition, that's laying of the eggs. Now, what happens is that the presence of wounds, the smell of a fresh wound or an existing wound actually attracts the flies. Another thing is this, that without the presence of an existing wound, they can actually attack an animal. And that is because they are also attracted to mucous membranes. So the ocular, the gingival mucous membranes, or the navel of animals, they don't care about whether there is a wound or not. They can start the whole thing. And that's why they are called primary screwworms. Okay? Now, as I said, the eggs are laid in masses. Each mass could contain up to 300 eggs. Okay? So when they lay it, now they could either lay the eggs right on top of a wound, or on the fresh, on an intact skin right beside the wound. Okay, so they either lay right on the wound or beside the wound. And then these eggs would hatch within 12 hours. Once they hatch, they burrow into the wound. Either they burrow into the skin around the wound or the wound itself. Now, this is important for us to note that the reason why they are called screwworm is because, you remember I said they have, each segment has spines around it, making it look like a screw. But then, when you see them on a wound, they are buried into the wound. And then they are buried head downwards into the wound. So that's where they get the old term screwworm, because of their morphology and the way they are in the wound. If you see this image, you will see quite a lot of them. Now, the idea is that this posterior region, if you remember, I mentioned spiracular plates, what they use to breathe. That is the only region that you will see on the surface of the wound, because that's what they use actually to breathe, and they can survive for as long as they can. Now, they stay in this position, expand the wound, more flies coming, lay enough eggs to expand the wound, and they stay there for about 5 to 7 days as larvae. Now, after about 7 days, they drop, they emerge from this wound and drop onto the soil. And once they do that, the next thing is for them to pupate. Now, the pupa stage is just them having a brownish covering. So it's like the larvae is only thicker and a bit tougher, okay? And they stay in the soil. Now, they stay in this stage for a couple of days, and then the adult flies emerge. Now, the thing there is that the adult flies emerge from 7 days. Now, it could be 7 days up to 2, 3, 4 months, depending on temperature. And this is where the ecological factor of temperature comes in. The colder it is, the longer they will stay at a pupal stage. But the warmer it is, the faster they become, they emerge as flies, okay? And then the life cycle continues, okay? So, sorry. All right. So I want to show us some lesions, how this thing appears. And for those that are not yet familiar with images of this infestation, I would like you to be prepared. It's a bit gross. I love them being gross. I would have loved to put so many, but I don't know how people can manage themselves. So I just put this few. Now, you will see here, this was the picture initially. You will see the flies, the larvae embedded within this wound. These are already getting ready to be dropped and then pupate. And this is what you can have in advanced cases. We also have a few bad images of those that affect humans, all right? But then, what are the risk factors of infestation? Everything tailors towards the presence of wound. Okay, I said they could affect wounds or intact membranes, but any condition or any situation that would cause wound to be present on an animal or a human will predispose to this. The commonest ones are the ones I'm listing here. Tick infestation. And if you notice, we have a lot of ticks almost everywhere. This to me is more or less saying that everything, don't let me be a prophet of doom, because if this could predispose, almost every animal will be at risk. Another one is flies. So the presence of wounds caused by other myotic flies is also a risk factor, because this will attract the flies to come lay extra eggs. Then livestock management practices, shearing, branding, anything that could lead to cuts on the skin of the animal will predispose animals to this. And then we have poor hygiene or neglect. So animals that are neglected or that are not well taken care of, the flies tend to, anything that causes the animal to stink in any way will attract the flies to them. Others are surgical wounds, and as we know, what is wrong? As we know, we have surgical procedures occurring on farms, even in hospitals, like dehorning, tail docking, castration, and the likes. Another thing is fly worry, which quite a few farms institute measures to prevent this. But when you have a lot of flies on a farm or disturbing an animal, either those that bite, once they bite, the animal, if it's in an endemic area, the animal is well prone. But then, even if they do not bite, animals take steps to prevent themselves from flies or the worry of flies. Sometimes this leads to injuries, traumatic injuries, or just some physiological injuries, okay? And as I said, traumatic injuries. And then lastly, whenever there is any sort of opening on the animal, like a newly born animal with the navel being there, they are attracted to it. Okay, and then as I said, they can attack any intact mucous membrane. So these are all factors. Now for humans, sorry for the images, it's necessary and it's beautiful. Sorry. So, but we have this in humans. We have much gory pictures than this. So I'm being kind to just put these few ones there. All right. So the risk factors for humans, thing that will let humans stay stationary outdoors will predispose. That's a very big factor. So those that get drunk and then fall in pits, well, yeah, that's one of the major things. The ones that concern us here at the vet school is this, contact with animals. So veterinarians, farm managers, farm owners, and all that are always at risk of it. Fortunately, these flies tend not to disturb humans as such. So we are more of like an opportunistic host to them. But if they find someone like this, well, it's a field day for them. Another thing is, for those that like hiking, I don't like hiking. And I know why. Hiking in places where I'm the only one there and I get into an accident, then I have to start praying to God to save me. No, I wouldn't do that. Now, one of the problems is if someone gets into an outdoor activity that gets them immobilized and they have an injury and is in an endemic area, there is a very high chance that they come back home with some flies, okay? And then generally traveling to endemic areas, which I know a lot of people do. So these are some of the factors that can predispose. So now the next thing is to talk about some of the ecological factors of these myiasis. Is the first one, which I think is very important, is their wide host range. They don't care about which host. They can feed on any animal, any human that comes their way. Now, the thing there is now this, that the wild animals are the major source, the major way they keep their population, how would I put it, stable. So their persistence depends not on the domesticated animals, but on the wild animals. And we always would have wild animals. So that's a big factor. Another thing is boundary human and animal migration. This is what I know that the US is currently trying to work on and ensuring they're trying to prevent the introduction from quarantining and monitoring the animals that cross our borders. But then there are cars that also cross the borders. Cars keep these flies in. Okay, so there are so many things that could go wrong. Another thing is the distribution and the abundance of ectoparasites. There is no way you can live in an environment you wouldn't have flies or you wouldn't have ticks. They would always be there. So if they are going to be there, then that's a big risk. If this comes in, measures I know have been put in place, but it's going to be a serious issue. And we mentioned temperature the other time. So during cold temperatures, the prevalence or the incidence will reduce because it takes longer time for the life cycle to complete. But in warm temperatures, the life cycle is a bit faster. And then the last one, which I have here, is the habitat. Now, in forest or rainforest or tropical-like habitat, we have a lot of the flies. Whereas in more arid habitat, it's a bit less distributed. So for me, lastly, I would like to talk about the problem or the risk of reintroduction. What should be considered? Number one is this technique, the biological control, which involves introduction of sterile males, which have been previously irradiated. Now, if these does come into the country, this is the only method that I'm aware of that could tackle this. And as I said, this is possible solely because of the life cycle of this fly, in that the females only mate once. So because of that, once you introduce a sterile male into the population and they mate with the females, all the eggs will be infertile, which will help in the control. The other thing which should be considered is, do we dress all the wounds of all animals? How possible is it? Well, that's just my question. Another one is the use of fly repellents. How effective are fly repellents in tackling flies generally? How much more the screwworm? And then the use of insecticides on a wide scale. Is this advisable? Is this what should be done? These are some of the things that, some of the questions. But then, for me personally, and then some reports that I've read, the wildlife is a very, very strong contributor to this. And they are very, very important. Now, how do you prevent injuries on animals that we don't regularly come in contact with? And don't forget, these animals are along the borders of different countries. So for me, even though we are really focused on the animals coming through our borders, this is the greatest risk, in my opinion. I would like any other suggestion in this. But if animals in the wild keep getting injured, there is a very high chance that this gets in. Because how do we control that? So as I said, considerations include how do we survey or capture injured wildlife? How do we manage the wound of all wildlife that could be possibly injured? And then in so many of the wildlife, so many of our drugs are toxic and contraindicated. So how do we balance all that? So in summary, this is what I have to present. So in summary, we're just talking about, we've been able to talk about some of the types of myiasis that we have and the presence of wounds on animals being a very significant factor. And then temperature and some other factors start influencing the disease distribution, and the fact that wildlife and transboundary animal or human movement are important contributors to the risk of reintroduction of the screwworm into the United States. So that's what I have for you today. Dr. Jennifer, do we still have time for questions?
Yes.
Okay, so that's about it. Thank you so much.
Thank you for your presentation. How far can an adult fly travel in its lifetime?
Based on common knowledge, at least available knowledge, they could fly some considerable distance. I can't really put a figure on that. But then, one of the major contributing factors to the distance a fly can move is actually wind. So we do have a lot of that here, right? So if they do get in, we are in trouble because they can disperse long distances. Ideally, flies take rest. They are not like birds, so they fly short distances within themselves. And the truth is this: once a fly can identify a host population, they don't go that far. But if there is wind favoring them, they can go long distances. And as I said, that's personally the fear I have for the issue of reintroduction. Because, well, the kind of wind that we have here is discouraging. Let me put it that way. Yeah.
Does the host have to be alive for the females to lay eggs in, or can they do it in like a dead animal with a wound?
Okay. Should the animal, or must the animal be alive?
Yes, sir.
No. They're okay with any animal. They prefer fresh wound though, but then they can lay their eggs in any existing wound, yeah, even on a dead animal.
Doctor, thank you. Is this presentation going to be available?
Yes, absolutely.
No, I mean, so we can like have a copy of this to show? Super, thank you.
Doctor, this probably isn't a question that you can answer. I appreciate your presentation, but the host animals being wildlife crossing the border is Texas Parks and Wildlife, are they heavily involved in all of the discussions that are happening along the Texas border? I'm just going to speak of Texas and Texas Parks and Wildlife. And also, you know, when do you expect the fly to cross the Texas border? And I know that's a hard question to answer, but assume in the next several months?
That's probably a better question for Dr. Dingus and that group when they get later in the day. Any other questions?
Let me quickly say something about the first question, sir. To be honest, I have read some involvement of the Texas wildlife in this whole prevention stuff. The details about it, I do not have the complete details of what they are talking about or the measures they are putting in place. However, the timeline, for possible reintroduction, I wouldn't say, but then I have a very strong opinion that during these warm summer months, we should have a little bit of more caution, more measures put in place to prevent this. Because then we have more activities of the wildlife, more activities of the animals, and then this could be a very big problem. Yep.
Thank you for your presentation here. I'm curious, how long can in the pupa stage in the ground, when it gets cold, I'm just curious to know how long will it stay? 6 months, 12 months? How long can it stay in the ground before it matures?
Okay, so when they are in the ground at the pupal stage, so long as the pupal stage, there is something called hypobiosis. So long as they go into that state, they could stay there for as long as possible, more than a year. So ideally, if temperatures warm up, they quickly get their stuff and get out of the pupal stage. But if the temperatures stay for as long as there is the winter or the temperatures are cold, they stay in the soil and just hibernate of some sort. So they can stay for as long as a year in the soil. Yeah.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Dr. Olafemi, for your great presentation. We will take a short break and we'll our next speaker will start at 1:45. I'd like to take the opportunity to thank Merck for sponsoring the snacks and the drinks outside. So we'll resume once again at 1:45. All right, we'll get started back. So I was so excited to get started this morning. This afternoon, I forgot to introduce myself. So I'm Dr. Jennifer Kojal. I'm one of the food animal faculty members here at Texas Tech, and also the continuing education director. And it's my pleasure to introduce our next speaker, Dr. Chris Womack, private practitioner from down at San Angelo.
Okay, wow, that's good. I guess I need to start. I am a private practitioner. I make no policy. I'm not involved in R&D. I'm just a practitioner that's been involved. I mean, I'm old enough to remember treating screwworms when I was a kid here on the Edwards Plateau. So it's pretty near and dear to me, and it's got me a little bit fired up. And I'm just here to tell a story. That's plain and simple. I'm not going to get way out in the weeds. We already have a pretty good background on the life cycle and the ecology of the flies. So there's no need for me to get too far out on that, but it's obviously important, and we're not going to have a test, but is it working now?
Mm-hmm.
This is working? Okay, excuse me, we had technical difficulties. Like I said, I'm old, so technical difficulties come with the territory, right? So I've been tasked with telling the story, given the history. I got a bunch of slides, but it's a story, and we're gonna talk about it as a story. This is a story I know, and I can tell it. I guess the first point was the historical distribution, the geography of where the New World Screwworm was in North America, and it was from right here, to Argentina. Pretty wide pretty wide distribution. Curiously enough, they said during the Florida was not endemic until the 1930s. And the Dust Bowl era, we moved a lot of livestock from west to east. And the screwworm fly was introduced to Florida back in the 30s. After that, prior to the 50s, there it was, kind of I-40 south to Argentina. Pretty significant landmass there. The historical impact, it's pretty easy to sum it up, and it was a devastating impact. We already found out that the female screwworm is attracted to fresh wounds, and the larvae feed on those fresh wounds. A friend of ours from Costa Rica sent us this particular how do I make that play? That's the umbilicus on a Bremer cross calf. Think about that. That's the first wound that occurs in their life. Is their umbilicus. Think about her vulva is bound to get a wound on it during parturition, during calving. If a calf is a little rough nursing and the teat cracks, well, we got a wound. The bull, if a bull is walking through the pasture and it's rough grass and he gets a small wound on his prepuce, or even if he doesn't get a wound on the prepuce, the mucous membranes of the prepuce are certainly a potential site of infestation. Did it run? Did the video run? Okay, pretty gross. As we saw, we know that the mouthpieces of those little double tracheal tubes, you can see them when those worms come to the surface. You can see those kind of look like little eyes looking at you. But I remember as a kid seeing them. I helped my dad. It was exciting. He was mad and said a lot of bad words. We roped calves. We tied them on the ground. He took baling wire and drug the maggots out. When they sent me this, I could smell it, I promise you, on the video. It's something that doesn't leave your mind. I was a little kid when this happened. So it's a big deal, especially if it's in that animal. It's a big deal to that animal. Husbandry practices, again, we covered this already: castrating, branding, dehorning, tail docking, shearing, ear tagging, vaccinating. Think about an implant. Oh my goodness, that's a big old wound. Horsefly bites. They talk about in Central and South America, the vampire bat bites on cattle being a big traumatic wound that allows the screwworm flies to take hold. Think about a deer shedding its velvet. That's a big deal. And all of those are fair game for a screwworm fly. Mucous membranes, we talked about that as well. The nasal passages. You think people are going to get wound up when the homeless people living on the street start having screwwormiasis? You think there'll be some public outcry? I think so. It'll be awful. I read histories of people putting children down for a nap in the shade of a tree or on a porch. And not tending to them, not be standing over them, keeping the flies off. The flies blowing the infant's nostrils. It's an infant, it's nonverbal, it's fussy for a couple of days, and then it dies from meningitis. The worms migrate through the cremophore plate and into the meninges, and here we are. That's not something you want to think about, but that's a reality of the parasite. All right. Told you I was going to tell a story. A story's got to have a list of characters. there's a bunch of stakeholders that were involved in the historical eradication. And I would tell you, it would be pretty possible for our audience to be made up of all of these individuals with the exception of the fly. We hope it's not there. But this eradication process, strategy, program, whatever you want to call it, if you think about this, this was the One Health initiative back in the late 50s and early 60s before it was even a thing. So this was a crazy collaboration. And the sterile fly or sterile insect technique was the workhorse. That's what did the job. That's what we're going to depend upon doing the job. We're going to have a few more technologies available now than they had in the 60s, but the long and the short, think about the wildlife. How are we going to treat the wildlife? We're not going to be able to. The sterile insect technique is going to be the workhorse of this thing. Again, talk about this this collaboration. You had livestock producers, they were losing money left and right? They couldn't get calves raised, couldn't get lambs raised, couldn't get sheep raised, lose sheep that were being sheared, lose hair sheep, Angora goats that were being sheared. They were losing money, so they were fired up. The veterinarians, they had a lot of morbidity in their patients from screwworm myiasis. They had a whole lot of mortality. Pretty frustrating as a veterinarian. Think about it being an MD. There wasn't really much you could do to a person. They had to be mechanically removed if they were up deep in the nasal passages. This is before all the arthroscopic and endoscopic techniques. I read reports of patients begging for euthanasia because it was such an excruciating, painful death. Awful stuff to think about. But so the MDs were on board. We had some entomologists that were incredibly insightful. We had some geneticists that were, again, incredibly insightful. We had engineers, we had nuclear scientists, we had lawyers, we had politicians, we had a lot of people involved, and they all collaborated. Crazy, crazy success story of the eradication program. Again, talking about this collaboration that took place. Back up just a bit. The sterile fly technique was developed. It was identified as a potential for eradication. In 1954, they tested it on the small island of Curaçao, and it was very successful. Brought it to Florida, again, very successful. It's an isthmus. It's pretty easy to control the landmass there. They started north and went south, incredibly successful. Got the southeast clear, declared free of screwworms in 1958. Then here, what's important to me, what's endearing to me, is my grandfather, my father, their cohorts, your father, they contributed monies for the seed money to get this program started. The private sector put up a third of the monies required for the initiation of the Southwest eradication program. That's huge. The feds wouldn't do it, the state couldn't do it, and the private sector did it. And then the federal government, the state government said, oh my gosh, if it's such a big deal that the private sector can put the seed money up, we're going to run with it. Crazy, crazy successful program. You can't make this up. I mean, it was almost unimaginable that this took place. We started in 1962. Again, we formed, the private sector formed the Southwest Animal Health and Research Foundation, private monies. The coordinated program started in 62. 1966, the U.S. was declared free of screwworms. I got a bunch of question marks behind that because I take exception to that. In reality, we still had screwworm cases from 1966 to the early 80s. 91, Mexico was declared free. 94, we formed a joint commission with the Panamanian government, the USDA and the Panamanian government, collaborated to build the facility in Panama that's still in existence today. All the way down to we started north, we went south, we got all the way to the Darien Gap, and in 2002, Panama was declared free. Crazy, crazy success story. We had a bad deal. We had a bad parasite. It was awful. We had some really, really bright people, and they collaborated. They had some really novel ideas. You read the accounts of the entomologists, and they were chastised by their peers. This crazy sterile insect, I mean, what are you talking about? Irradiating flies? I mean, they were chastised publicly for their ideas. It was a crazy, crazy, crazy success. The tenets of the previous eradication strategy, again, the sterile insect technique was the workhorse. It was a tremendous breakthrough in science, but it was also a tremendous breakthrough in cooperation. We had private individuals, rancher going to rancher, getting donations to apply towards a treatment program. You had state governments cooperate, you had the state and federal governments cooperate, you had international cooperation. And as we moved it south, it was almost a miracle. The map over there shows the progression from north to south. 40 years, we saw eradication. Took us about 20 to get it from North America, took about another 20 to get it from Central America to the Darien Gap. The financial benefits, I've seen all kinds of different estimations. I don't think you can really truly estimate it. I'm not a statistician or an economist, but it is unmeasurable, I would think, but it's huge. And it goes without saying, as livestock producers and veterinarians, the benefit to the individual animals is that goes without saying. That's huge. Think about it. All right. This was a crazy successful eradication program, but it's not to say there weren't some setbacks. So these are maps of confirmed cases. 1962, that's when the program started. Pretty wide distribution. 1967, remember the USDA declared the United States free of screwworms in 1966. Not quite. This is where I come in. 1972, I was 7. I remember this vividly. There's some of y'all in here that remember this as well. Not many of us still around that remember this, but this was a tremendous setback for us. Why did it happen? Multifactorial. You know, were there more cases being reported? Were there more incursions across the border, wildlife, maybe cattle moving illegally? Was it weather? Was it apathy? People said, oh, well, we're free. We don't need to worry about it. They quit checking the animals as frequently. Did all the hands that were used to treating and roping and doctoring the wormies every day, did they move to pound? I mean, again, it's a multifactorial situation there. By 79, again, we're pretty good in Texas, but if you're in southern Arizona in 1979, I bet you would take offense to the fact that they said the screwworm was eradicated. It wasn't eradicated there. So, other setbacks. 2016 in Florida, the Keys deer. there was an outbreak. You look at the date there, 2006, September 2016 to April of 2017. There's some lessons to be learned for us veterinarians in this outbreak. We kind of dropped the ball on it. I had some conversations with two researchers, two people that were actually in Florida in 2016 working on this outbreak. And in reality, the first cases in the Keys deer were identified as, they were surmised to have taken place as early as July. The Florida Parks and Wildlife were euthanizing deer as early as July for zombie deer syndrome. They were staggering around. They were under the effects of the myiasis, affecting their equilibrium, feeling real bad, stumbling around. The Keys deer are apparently extremely tame and very endearing to the populace there. So they called Parks and Wildlife. They euthanized the deer and they didn't submit samples. They disposed of the carcasses in an open pit. They didn't disinfect the carcasses. So a couple lessons there. There's also reports of pets being presented to veterinary clinics for treatment. 2 dogs, a cat, and a pig, all in that July to September timeframe. And because it wasn't on our minds, it's been gone for so long, nobody thought to submit the samples. And talking to the wildlife guy that participated in this eradication, he said, in his opinion, he thought that we could have shortened the outbreak by a month and a half, 2 months, if we would have reported as soon as it happened. Going to go out on a limb on this one. They did use dormectin in this outbreak. They put dormectin in donut holes, and they had the populace, had volunteers feed in the dormectin to the deer. I asked if there was any efficacy, either subjective or quantitative efficacy studies done, and the answer was no. The dormectin feeding coincided with the release of sterile flies. The problem was mitigated. We had eradication, but in reality, it was suggested to me that the outcry from the public to do something about the deer prompted them to use the dormectin. Ivermectin was not, they weren't allowed to use ivermectin because it's a wildlife refuge, and the non-target species were a big consideration. So ivermectin was not used. So lessons learned from me and my veterinary colleagues: we need to be vigilant. It needs to be on your mind. You're in the audience today because you're trying to learn about it, and kudos to everybody that's in the audience today, veterinarians and non-veterinarians alike. This is important. Be aware that it's on the radar. Don't ignore it. Okay, they could have shut this thing. You also have to consider that the land mass, they're talking about 26,000 acres, and there's one road in and out of the Keys. So they could shut down the movement. They can inspect every animal coming in or out of the Keys, and it's 26,000 acres. I mean, some of these ranches out here have pastures that big. That was a successful re-eradication, but the situation there is a whole lot different than the situation will be on the southwest border. So, again, setbacks in the eradication program. Here we are now. This is the map as of May 9th. These are where the endemic countries, all of Central America is now considered endemic, and these are the incursions north in Mexico. We're just a touch north of that Isthmus of Tehuantepec now. And those are the confirmed cases. So I had the opportunity to go to COPEG in Panama the first part of April. A really meaningful trip, really eye-opening for me. And remember back in last year, 2 years ago, I guess, it got out of Panama, got out of the buffer zone, started marching north. And when we were there, I asked the personnel the question, how did this happen? And the answer was it was multifactorial, kind of a perfect storm. COVID started the ball rolling downhill. There was supply chain disruption, so there was disruption in production at the COPEG facility. There was no surveillance in the field because the inspectors had to stay home, had COVID quarantine, so they weren't allowed to go out. So the inspectors that were inspecting the animal transport, the field surveillance personnel from COPEG weren't allowed to go out on farms and investigate reports. So that started it. And then the previous administration's immigration policy opened the border. They said when that happened, it was Katie bar the door. They said that illegal movement of people and animals from South America through the Darien Gap, they were overwhelmed. They couldn't stop it. They couldn't do anything. It was terrible. There was a suggestion that maybe some environmental changes allowed the life cycle of the parasite to decrease from 21 to 19 days. We just found out that colder weather slows the life cycle down. We're talking, Panama, pretty warm and moist all the time. So it stands to reason that life cycle in Panama is shorter. Ignorance is kind of a mean word, but generational ignorance, the loss of knowledge. Our generation have not been exposed to the parasite in the United States. It's been 50 years for some people. Even in Mexico, it's been 25 years. In Panama, it's been 20 years since they had to deal with it out in the field. And people forgot how to institute husbandry practices to minimize the effects. They forgot how to look for it. They forgot how to report it. And here you go. It took hold and away we went. My last charge was what I think the veterinarian's role in the eradication program should be. This is the USDA's kind of fact sheet, working sheet. It's available. Anybody can get that. I'm going to give my opinion. I think our number one role is education. And again, kudos to everybody in the audience today, because you're taking it upon yourself to take the time to try and educate yourself on the situation. I think as veterinarians, we got to educate ourselves first. I think we owe it to our clients to educate them. I don't know about y'all, but my phone's been burning up for a month with clients calling me with questions. I think we need to educate our colleagues. There's a lot of our colleagues, especially in the small animal field, that don't know about it. And honestly, they're probably going to be the ones that make the first diagnosis. If the veterinarians in Florida would have identified one of those pets that was brought to them earlier on in the outbreak, we could have shortened the situation. I think the public, it's important to educate the public too. So whatever we can do to provide the public with the correct information. Misinformation is going to be just as dangerous or worse than no information. So as veterinary professionals, I think we need to be able to provide the correct information to the public. That got out of control real quick. I think our second responsibility is clinical. Obviously, we're veterinarians. We need to learn how to treat the myiasis. We need to know how to mitigate it. There's techniques to mitigate it with husbandry practices. We need to know how to realize it's a problem and report it. I think that's of paramount importance. I was assured by the COPEG personnel that at the first confirmed case in the United States, all of the resources that we have, there are flies, we're paying for it. I was assured that all those resources would be diverted to the mainland United States at the first confirmed case of New World Screwworms here. That's great. I think that's very, very important. Remember, this is not a biblical plague. We're not going to have a cloud of screwworm flies flying out of Mexico in mass. This is going to be little insidious incursions. There's going to be, a deer that crosses the border. There's going to be feral hogs. There's going to be wild cattle. You're going to have people move cattle illegally across the border. You could even have a person be infested and come across the border. As soon as we can identify those cases and mitigate this thing, we have a chance to control it. We're not going to be able to eradicate it until we increase our sterile fly production. But with the flies that we have at our disposal right now, if we can identify the hotbeds as soon as they happen and target a response to that, I think we can defeat the thing. It's still in Mexico. That's a given. It's still there. So we need more resources in the form of sterile flies to re-eradicate this thing. And I think the long-term goal should be to re-eradicate it from North America, Central America, and get it back down to the Darien. I think that's the ultimate goal. Third responsibility, I do think we need some outreach. Get involved. Get involved in your professional organization, your producer groups. I'm not really big on political organizations, but it's important. We need to inform the key players out there how serious this is and how important it is that we get control. Number one, first thing we're going to have to do is get control of it. And then the second goal is to re-eradicate it. So we're going to have our legislators, state and federal, both on board to back us up. This is a federal problem to fix. It's not. I don't think it's possible to fall on the public sector like they did before. Okay. All right. Little soapbox here. One of the reasons I'm doing what I'm doing is our predecessors, my grandparents, their cohorts, they provided time and treasure to this eradication program in the past. And it's come back on our watch, and that's pretty poignant for me. It gets my hackles up, and we got to do better. We can't let this thing get out of control again, get established. We have the technology, we have the resources to control it, as long as we can identify it and get the word out. And lastly, sometimes when you're swimming in circles, you got to reach for some help, ask for it. That's all. I think my time's up or past. We got 1 minute. Okay, 1 minute for questions, and then that's it. And remember, I have no regulatory position here. I have no policy position here. I'm a practicing veterinarian. I'm an accredited veterinarian, so I will have some regulatory duties after they're established. as far as the history goes, the story, anybody?
Any questions for Dr. Womack?
Cool. All right,
Oh, that one back.
all right.
My last question for the day, but I looked up the definition, eradication,
Yep,
and it's the complete destruction. And I also looked up the definition of re-eradicate, and it's, according to Webster, it's not a phrase. And when you have all of these different stakeholders in play, and then you showed us what had happened in Florida, and I'm old enough to remember the Texas Panhandle as well. When I was younger, doctoring screwworms. Should we change the messaging a little bit? Because it seems that it's a far reach to say that we've really ever eradicated it.
I'm gonna give you my opinion, and I think yes. I think that statement about 1966, the screwworm was eradicated. I think that was I don't think that was a fair statement to those of us, at least on the Edwards Plateau, and sure enough, I mean, if you were in Western Arizona in '79, you didn't think it was eradicated. I can promise you that. Again, I had question marks by that because, again, I took exception to that. And I'm not a policymaker. I got no skin in that game, but I tend to agree. I think that was an unfair statement for him to make. There's no doubt it was a successful program, immensely successful. Think about it. It was miraculous. It was wonderful. And I graduated from veterinary school in 92. 91, it wasn't in Mexico anymore. It was a non-entity to me as a veterinarian. I remember it as a kid. I remember my grandparents talking about it. My dad talking about it. I remember helping my dad. But again, it's out of mind, out of sight for us. And that's the frightening thing. That's why this thing is important today, is to get the word out, get it back on people's radar, both producers and veterinarians, to get it on your radar. Let's be looking out for this. Report them. If you got a question, if somebody's bringing something to my clinic that's got maggots in it, unless it's a feces encased anus on a long-haired dog, I'm going to report the things. I'm going to send them in. Talked to animal health, our regional guy this morning, and he said, please tell everybody, tell them to call us. If you have a question, submit it. So, fair enough? You like that? Okay.
All right, let's thank Dr. Womack. All right. So for those online, thanks for joining us. We're going to get started with our next session. So we have Dr. Chris Womack and Dr. Michael Cruz-Pinn here with us. And so we'll get started. So I'll start with you, Dr. Cruz-Pinn. So will you give us an update about what is the current status in Costa Rica? And Dr. Cruz-Pinn will also share some perspectives and some images from one of our colleagues that originates from Guatemala as well. So let me pull up this PowerPoint and we'll get started. All right.
Here. So some of these pictures are from cell phones, so they might not be the greatest quality when you see them there, but it should be playing on itself. And you'll see the pictures going around there. So I had the opportunity to call one of my colleagues back at home. She is one of the veterinarians that is part of the team that is dealing with this issue at the moment. The team, it seems to be about 24 technicians and 3 veterinarians for a country that's about a 13th of the size of Texas. What they do right now is they have both passive and active vigilance. So these teams have to go in this great system that they had organized there and visit every single farm in that area. It takes about 2 months to visit multiple farms the area that they're in charge of. So it takes quite a while to do that active vigilance, but
Ahí se están moviendo unos todavía.
those have been given to all the producers, or all the producers have access, so they get to make their own reports. The reports are simply for the veterinarian and the technician team to come to the farm and check on whether or not what we have is the New World Screwworm or some other worm growing in there, or some other fly growing in there. Part of the issue is that you can have combined infections, right? And where you have both the New World Screwworm and other bug flies in there. So it creates a problem for diagnosis sometimes. So it seems like between the first report of cases in Panama and the first report of cases in Costa Rica, there were like 14 days. So it moved fairly fast. Now, that doesn't mean that that was the first case. Maybe the other cases were not reported. As my pathology professor used to say, things only exist where people are looking for them. So if nobody was looking for the New World Screwworm, nobody was going to find it. But as soon as they said it was back, people started finding it anywhere. Cattle obviously seems to be the species that is more damaged by it, but sheep as well tend to have lesions, particularly in the hooves and in the eyes. And then you also have dogs, cats, wildlife species, anything that really has any injuries in there. The process that they're using to mitigate this, for the most part, as I understand, is a 4-pillar program. One is make sure that there is continuing education for producers. So these technicians have to do at least one talk a week for local producers, depending on where they are. They have to do that for local veterinarians as well, as to how to identify and treat the larvae. Then you have the vigilance system. That will be the second pillar. The third pillar clearly is the making sure that the injuries are being healed and treated before there's any infection. One of the things that they recommend is that if you're going to do anything that is going to cause any injury in the animal, so or dehorning or branding or anything else that would cause an injury in the animal, that they recommend that ivermectin or any of the other drugs are being given about 10 days before the procedure, so the concentration in the body is high enough to prevent the attack there. And then the last part, the last pillar, is that system of the sterile fly. But it seems like most of this sterile fly has been released in Mexico, and we're probably not going to get it until, what was it, 20 years later than it got to Costa Rica. I don't know if it's going to be faster this time or it's going to be a little bit slower, but coincidentally, the eradication date was like a couple months before I started vet school, so they didn't even teach us about this worm in vet school because they said it was eradicated, which was a mistake now. But that's part of what I have. I might have missed a couple of things here, but
You're in.
I'm up.
Yep. You want me to push?
Yeah. How do I turn this on? No?
Yeah.
Okay. I don't have a whole lot to add to it other than my firsthand experience in Panama. We've got a quick little slideshow. Okay. All right. I was fortunate enough to have the opportunity to go to COPAG, which is our facility. It's we said it was established initially in 94, and then Panama was declared eradicated for whatever that's worth in 2002, and they've done a really good job keeping this thing under control all these years. Fascinating opportunity. It's in Pacora, Panama, which is just outside of Panama City. It's an 85-acre facility, big, highly secure, highly biosecure facility. Had to submit credentials 2 weeks before I was able to go in. This is the entire administrative and professional staff. Part of them are USDA, part of them are META personnel, and they work hand in hand. They gave us real professional presentations, certainly talking about the distribution of the positive cases through Panama, the movement, the illegal movement of livestock and people through Panama and how that contributed. The checkpoints, they showed the map of the checkpoints. And again, we didn't have capabilities during COVID to man these stations. So people got used to running through them, and that continued once they overwhelmed them with illegal migration of animals and people. They again have the pillars of control. That's all they have now. They don't have sterile flies to use. All those resources currently are diverted to Mexico. So Panama's back in the Wild West. So education, reporting, transportation, inspection of the animals, encouraging the producers to only transport healthy animals. That's all they've got. So it's they're doing the best they can. If you go on Facebook and look at COPEG America, every week they have a different animal and they have the same 4 pillars of control. They reiterate. The one last week was talking about urban animals being at risk, and they had a picture of a dog. So it doesn't matter whether it's in your garden, on your terrace, on your patio, in your apartment, it's still at risk. And that's all they got. They're doing the best they can. Yeah, they're teaching the producers about different methods of mitigating wounds, cauterizing dehorns, using injectable Dectomax or ivermectin before the procedures. They have a few products that they can use to treat the animals there that we don't have. Negasant powder, which is Coumaphos and a sulfa. When they have active animals or when they're castrating them, they put Negasant in the castration site. Really effective. We don't have that available here. But they don't really have the prospect of having sterile flies at their disposal for an indeterminate amount of time. They're an extremely professional, there was an extreme sense of urgency. Hey, this is bad. We need to get the word out. When you go back to the States, tell anybody that'll listen to you what's going on, what happened here, and don't let it happen back in the States. They reiterated multiple times, as soon as we get a positive case in the United States, they're going to divert all the resources from COPEG to the United States. So that's what we have to work with. That's going to be huge for us. And both producers and veterinarians, I think we've got to be hyper vigilant. And as soon as we get a first case, we have again, like I said before, this isn't a biblical plague. The screwworms aren't going to come from south to north in a big cloud. This is going to be individual animal incursions. And once they get established in a locality, then we can see more and more cases. But we have the ability to mitigate that if we know it's happening. So be vigilant, report, treat those. Remember to treat the animals. We have at our disposal a few things. We can use Catron spray. We can give them Dectomax. You get a longer tissue residue with that. On our pets, we give them Brevecto. Brevecto works great on myiasis. I've used it for years treating myiasis in pets. So, but treating the animals, killing the larvae. Remember, if those larvae make it to the ground and they pupate, then they're increasing the population in the wild. So treating the animal, don't just chalk it up as, well, yeah, I'm gonna lose 20% of my lamb crop because it's too difficult to go out there and treat them. Well, we need to treat them. It's imperative. So that's a double-edged sword. We don't have the workforce available. We don't have the people that can do it. but it's imperative that we do. So we got to make those strides. Education, this is just a picture of the COPEG submission forms. I saw one floating around up here. Where is that from? The two? Mexico. Okay. Yeah. That's their, for those of us that are old enough, we had the brown cardboard tubes with the metal caps on them with a vial that was self-addressed USDA lab admission. And if we had as a producer, you could get them at any feed store. You can get these at any feed store, I'm assuming, correct? Yeah. In Panama, you can get them in the convenience stores out in the country, the tubes.
Yes, to give the people, but they have that in check.
Right.
Vigilance and surveillance.
That's what they have. In Mexico, they have the luxury of having the sterile flies. In Panama and points south, again, that's the Wild West, man. They're back to the pre-eradication days. Again, we've got a few things in our toolkit that we can use that are better than or that we didn't have in the past, like the ivermectins. But it's still the Wild West, and I feel for those producers. They have all kinds of they have field days every couple of weeks. They have bags with all the information on how to do it, ball caps, key rings, bumper stickers. In 77, to re-eradicate, here in the United States, we had a massive education campaign. That's the COPEG equivalent. It's got a test tube in it. It's got a detailed submission form with coordinates. You're supposed to give GPS coordinates, and you submit them. Right now, being submitted to COPEG is epidemiology. It's information. They're not going to do anything about it. They can't do anything about it, but it's informative. And again, it's important. Education, studying it, getting the epidemiology delineated is still important. So I feel for them. I really do. It's frustrating for them. You can tell it's really frustrating for them. But if we're not vigilant and we don't take the controls at the very beginning and control this thing with targeted response, we could end up like this, and we don't want to end up like that again. Yeah, it's going to be endemic in Mexico. We're going to have to live with that for a while until we get more resources. So I don't know. Again, we got presentations. We had tours of the facility. Pretty fascinating, impressive. A lot of redundancy. We had a lot of quality control discussions, distribution discussions. That's a picture of their old box that they used to distribute flies. Many of us remember the old boxes that we would find out in the pasture here from the fly drops. They were rectangular boxes with a big target on them. When I was a kid, we used to find them in the pasture. Again, we did talk about why it failed, and we talked about how to mitigate it. That COVID thing, the supply chain, they have addressed that by redundancy in their wares. They have redundant equipment, parts for everything, from the motorcycles that their inspectors use to go out in the field to HVAC, hoses and belts. And I mean, it's an enormous warehouse where they're warehousing stuff. Controlled the migration. They said it was already better since January. R&D, again, I'm not involved in R&D, but R&D is important. We need more technologies. They described, the ARS people gave us a presentation out of Kerrville. They zoomed. We were sitting in Panama. They were sitting in Kerrville, and they gave us a presentation and talked about CRISPR technology to increase the number of male flies that are being produced on a hatch, attractants to maybe female attractants to maybe trap the female flies out in the wild, product development, lots. We have the capability, we have the technology, we need more information. We have more than our predecessors had. Education, like we talked about, and then sterile flies. At the end of the day, the sterile flies, the workhorse. That's what we got to do. Again, they wanted outreach. They want us to help, education, and be vigilant and report. That's from Panama to the Texas Panhandle. That's the same message right there. To be vigilant and report. That's the only way we're gonna get in front of this thing. Just for giggles, I had this. This is the book that I used. It's a really good read if you can ever get your hands on it. And it was published in 75. So again, if you look at these numbers over here, 1966, we still had 1,203 cases when it was eradicated. And then there's 72 eradicated, still had 90,000 cases. So just a little bit of information. That's all I got. You?
A couple of things in this presentation that were taken out of the website of the Mexico, what is it called?
Seneca.
That one, yeah.
Seneca.
Which has a little bit of the reports in the rest of the countries of Central America. It's weird because it kind of like jumps from very few cases in some countries to very much a lot of cases in the next one. That's the last ones maybe. It could be just how many cases are actually being reported or how many cases are actually being confirmed by diagnosis. In Costa Rica, there's 4 labs that does diagnosis of this particular worm. And if it's a human case, those larvae are also sent to the same labs that just give priority for any human cases before they do the animal ones. One of the things that it's a problem is personal. There's not a lot of people that can do this, and they need to train more people so they can pass that information. Plus, there is it's not moving.
No, we died somewhere.
Interesting.
I don't know what it's.
That they did a couple of informal experiments where they just took some of the larvae and left them in an empty glass, and right there they pupated and hatched. So they might not necessarily even need dirt to grow to adulthood. So there it is. So this is what they have in that website. I don't know how accurate those numbers are or where they're coming from. That's what they are reporting, but it does seem like the animals that are less affected are dairy and goats, mostly because they are a little bit more intensive. So they have more people looking at the animals on a daily basis. So again, vigilance seems to be the most important part here. If there's an injury, it needs to be treated. And if there's contamination, the larvae need to be taken and killed so that they cannot reproduce. And then the report needs to be made so that the epidemiologists kept correctly. So ultimately, a lot of the efforts in Costa Rica are to make sure that producers, veterinarians, and other stakeholders are made aware of the issues and just not made it a problem, more make it as, hey, it's important for you to report so that we can deal with this, but you're not going to get any punishments or any, economic issues with it. There's also a part there where they had a study of how much it costs to correct a wound in an animal that didn't have any contamination or any larva contamination versus how much does it cost to cure an animal that already has larva contamination, which seems to be one of the strongest ways to convince producers to treat before you have the insect. Yeah, so it's about $20 for every 10,000 colones, if you want to make the math. But if not, just by simple numbers, you can see like in milk, you can have losses of up to what would that be, $80, and that has mostly to do because of the medications that you're going to give. You're going to have to get rid of all that milk, right? And then that is what it will cost in slow damage one. Insumos are consumables, basically. So anything that is materials, and then the one on the bottom is workforce and traveling there, which seems to be the most expensive part. But it's the difference between how many worms are in there with lower. What's the word I'm looking for? With lower numbers of worms, it seems to be cheaper to deal with it. But once that you have those massive lesions that you've seen in some of those pictures, then it becomes a lot more expensive. So using that might be a clue there.
All right, thank you. Any questions for our doctors? All right. Well, help me thank our speakers. So we're running a little bit ahead of schedule, which is great news, but we'll go ahead and we will take a short break and we will begin again at 3:15. All right, we'll get started again. So our next speaker is Dr. Kynan Sturgess. He's a private practitioner, owns Hereford Veterinary Clinic, and is also serves as one of our commissioners for the Texas Animal Health. So he will talk about New World Screwworm in the Americas. How did we get here?
Can you hear me all right? Too loud? First of all, I have to apologize for the liberties that Texas Tech used to put my name alongside industry experts. I would not consider myself that. I was just scooping manure the other day, so I don't feel like I'm in that vein, but probably the difference between me and most of y'all is that I've probably been paying attention to this a lot longer, and I would actually credit that mostly to D. Ellis, because he started talking to me about it probably in late 23 when this thing started blowing up in Panama, and I'm like, what? And then he starts telling me about, it reminded me of the case in Florida and all this stuff. And so it's kind of been on my radar a little bit longer, thinking that, oh, they're going to get control of it. And then, of course, he also got me involved with some other things where there's been actually tons of cooperation between the U.S. and Mexico and developing protocols for eradication of various diseases for quite some time. Ben, was it 20, 25 years? That this stuff has been going on. So most of those efforts have been centered around diseases like brucellosis, tuberculosis, to some degree, cattle fever ticks. I mean, those have been the things that have really been on the burner for those organizations. And so there's been tons of work and cooperation and collaboration basically between the countries for a long time. And so obviously now all of a sudden the organizations aren't talking so much about the others, although they still do, but screwworm has obviously come to the forefront. All right, Jen, you lied to me.
Right now.
So y'all have kind of seen this before, but it's interesting. One of the things that Dr. Womack, I don't think, mentioned was that, the reason it hadn't gotten across to Florida and Georgia and Alabama, Mississippi it's really thought that it was the Mississippi River, that it was just too far of an area for them to fly across at once. And so they didn't ever have it there until the cattle were actually moved there that were infested. And so it's not very good at crossing large expanses of water. It can, but usually needs quite a bit of help. And so we were talking about it, if they ever developed very good theory about how it made it into the Keys, and I think there's some speculation, but no one really knows. I mean, I think it might have been, some illegal immigration, people or animals coming across on boats, maybe the wind carried it, but that's quite a ways. And if it couldn't cross the Mississippi, it's hard to believe that it could cross from, say, Cuba across all the way to the Florida Keys when it's, 60 miles or somewhere in the neighborhood. But it took quite a while, and clearly we had reincursions in the U.S. and it's really what's put it all in perspective. But just look at that. I mean, it's 40 years to get it moved all the way down. So that's why it's such a big deal. Is it's not been an easy. It has been a successful program, but it's not something that's easy to do. So it's been endemic in these countries, I mean, as far as we know, since their existence. And so it was endemic here, before we got rid of it, but it's never been taken out of Cuba, Haiti, Dominican, even though Dominican is technically, I guess, a territory of the U.S., they've still never actually, I don't know that they've even tried. Do you know, Dr. Dinges, if it's ever been attempted in DR? I've never heard Dee talk about that, and he goes there quite a bit to do, and he's done research on screwworms there as well as other places. It's basically in all of South America except Chile, and best I can figure is that's primarily the Andes Mountains that have prevented that. I suspect that there's probably been some cases, but they've probably been isolated and didn't really go anywhere. But so far, they say that Chile really hasn't had issues with it. But Panama had been running for years and years. They'd have some cases. I mean, you're right there alongside Colombia, and so Colombia's still got it. They may put some right along the border, but there's always been some cases. But in 23, it literally exploded. Lots of. Dr. Womack covered most of the issues. The one thing that I've heard some USDA folks say is that the flies that they had been releasing they had propagated those same flies for years and years, and potentially had really never addressed trying to get new stock, and that it's thought that the libido of these male flies had just dwindled quite a bit, and they just weren't doing as good a job. And so, along with all these other factors, I mean, we think that this has become an issue again. So these are the actual case numbers, and I took the liberty of just adding them, putting them all together from all of the countries. So these cases are everything. So all of the species combined. Clearly, it's been the worst in Panama, but it's been going on there the longest. I would point you to the bottom there is that includes at least 311 cases. So these numbers are all since April 26th. So we actually got a presentation back on this date in Mexico, or pretty close to that date, I guess, and that's where those numbers come from. And so they were pretty current, and I've asked for some updates. The numbers in Mexico really haven't changed all that much. They've come up a little bit, but the one I would tell you that in Mexico they have had at least this was as of Tuesday, I got information from APHIS that there were at least 6 cases in humans by that date. Somewhere around 126 active cases that they're working on right now in Mexico. So at the time that we were at that meeting in Mexico, which was, what was that, the first week of May, something like that? there was still a lot of discussion going on about where we were headed. But if you want to see cases spread out by country, that kind of shows you where it's at. And then you can also see where these human cases had been primarily. Again, this is as of April 26. We know now we've at least had 6 cases in southern Mexico. I can recall APHIS folks telling us that they were actually getting requests from municipalities in Central America. They wanted the sterile flies put out over the cities because of the human cases that were occurring. And so it's one of those resources that Dr. Womack talked about, is that they just don't have that resource. They're basically putting them all out in Mexico now. And, you know, we can feel sorry for Panama for not having it, but Panama can make their own. You know, we've basically, this plan has been there. We built it. We funded it. It's our product. And so we're going to use it to take care of our country. And so it's in our best interest to start at the top and try to move it back south because of the way that landmass works. So in November, is when this all really kind of blew up, right? And so they halted production or export of livestock from Mexico into the US based on the first cases reported down in southern Mexico, which would have been in Campeche, I think. And so when that happened, the other statements that were released at that time is once they had a protocol to make sure that we could safely move cattle across the border again, then that could be reestablished. So that's what happened. And so from November until about late February, it took that long to develop that protocol and get everybody on board and approved from every side. So the protocol developed a little faster than that, but then the Mexican side of the equation, they had to develop the procedures and the facilities to make all of this meet the protocol needs. And so it's interesting to go through the protocol and understand it, because I think it can give us some insight on learning how to treat it ourselves as well, because as Dr. Womack mentioned, there's really only one product that's actually got a label, an approved label for screwworm, and that's Catron. So this protocol was put in place, but you got to understand, and I don't know how many of you have ever been to the border, but there's pretty significant inspection process that goes on already and has been in place for years. So these protocols were in place for a number of things. And so TB is one of the first things. So all of those cattle have to be TB tested in Mexico before they're qualified to even come to the port. And then they have to arrive at the port with those papers, with the right clip tags. If you've seen Mexican cattle, you've seen the blue clip tag in their ear, and that's basically their version of a TB tag. And so brucellosis is all about testing. It's really more about states, you know, developing free status, very similar to what we do here. And so those are similar blood tests. Fever ticks is all about making sure that they don't have any ticks on them, any ticks. Okay, they don't spend time to identify a tick. If they have a tick, it's a problem. And then all of those cattle were already getting dipped before they come across. And so most of the cattle probably get dipped, Daniel, 2-3 times before they get to the border. Yeah, because they can't afford for those cattle, because if they find one tick on an animal at the border, even prior to all this, they're done. That whole group cannot cross, and they get held at a significant expense. And then because they get dipped after they get inspected, and then they got to get re-inspected in, I think it's 2 weeks. So it's not that common for one to show up with a tick, because they take it pretty seriously. So what's changed in these protocols? Well, one is that they added what's called a pre-export inspection facility, and it has to be inside Mexico. The other thing is that the APHIS inspection facilities also have to be in Mexico now. And so in the past, we've had a number of these stations actually move into the US side just across the border, mostly because of security reasons. So for instance, Nuevo Laredo, I'd been to their station back in probably 96, and it was probably 10 or 15 miles inside the country. And you just went there, and it got to where it was just too much of a security issue. They couldn't provide the necessary security, so they moved that. So hence Laredo is no longer a station or a port that we're using right now. So until those security issues can be established, I mean, that it won't be a port of entry for some time. So when these cattle go through, before they get to the pre-inspection facility, they actually have to go through an export gathering station facility. I don't remember the exact name. They either get inspected and treated there, or it can happen at the ranch, at the ranch origin, if they've got enough numbers there. And so then once they reach the pre-inspection facility, and they have to actually have permission to get there. And there's every port's a little bit different, but basically there are controls about what cattle can show up at those places, and they can't show up without those permissions. Then yeah, very controlled. So then those cattle actually go through basically the same inspection they're going to go through with APHIS, but they go through it through Seneca. So we've mentioned Seneca multiple times. So Seneca, basically, you can assume it's very similar to USDA's APHIS group. So they have very similar duties within Mexico. It's just their version of APHIS. And so that's the personnel that actually manage all of the regulatory diseases within Mexico. So these pre-inspection facilities have to be completely separate and distinct from APHIS as well, so that they're not part of the same facility, but they're basically right next door. And I've got some pictures of some of them. And then right now, the only places that actually have a facility that will meet those requirements are in Douglas and Nogales, Arizona, which are both on the other side of the border from Sonora, and then Santa Teresa from Chihuahua and Presidio.
In Columbus, New Mexico, but it has been open due to
Right.
lack of staff.
Yeah, we all kind of wondered at first why Columbus hadn't opened, and Columbus is not that far from Santa Teresa, but yeah. But the problem, like you said, it's been USDA staffing is what it's been. So basically, they have to step back from when they bring those cattle to the port, basically 3 to 5 days, and it has to be within that window. No shorter than 3 and no longer than 5. And so these cattle have to be inspected by basically this MVRA is. It's basically the equivalent of an accredited Type 2 accredited vet in the United States. So that means that they've had the right training for that. And so they have to do their inspection. They can do that inspection at the export gathering facility, or they can do it on the ranch. So they're looking for visible wounds and any kind of sign of New World Screwworm infestation. And then they have to treat everything with ivermectin, and the key there is or equivalent product. And we've really pushed on USDA on a number of occasions, like, why won't you name doramectin? Because there's data out there in the literature that all shows, every piece of data I've seen has shown that doramectin is probably 2 to 3 times more effective. So what does that mean? Well, it means it'll last 2 to 3 times longer. So ivermectin probably will give you somewhere around 7 days of control if it's in there before they get the infestation, and doramectin is probably closer to 21 days. And these are injectables, not pour-ons. Porons don't work as well. The basic reason we get handed back to us is that it's in the regulatory code that it says ivermectin. And so basically, when they tell us our equivalent product, they're basically telling us we've got the wiggle room to do what we want, but they can't actually name it because they'd have to change it in the regulations. And we're like, we'll change it. Well, that's like I've never tried to change the regulation, but that's not something easily done. So the products are effective, and it's pretty tough for a fly larvae to gain any traction because it kills it as soon as it starts eating the tissue. So if that tissue already has the drug in it. I've not yet seen anything about using it to treat an active infection. I suspect that if I'm having to treat one, I'm probably going to use it, but I'm not going to use it by itself. I think that it's probably not going to give you enough initial kill to start with because it's going to take a little bit of time to get in. But, that's not unsimilar, JP, to it takes a little bit of time for even helminth parasites to start dying because it takes time for that drug to get into the system. And so it's just a limitation. It lasts a lot longer, which is a positive, but it doesn't necessarily kill all that fast. And that goes with a lot of parasites. So it's not really dissimilar in this case. But you're probably going to have to use something else. And so in the case of the protocol, if any animal is seen with a visible wound, then it has to be excluded from that export lot. And that really happens at any step. Now, if there's any sign that it has that, it's not going, and it has to be treated with Coumaphos dust. Now, in the protocol, it states 3%. In the US, all I know of is that we have a 1%, unless any of you guys from Lanco know that you have a formulation that's higher than that we don't know about. It's not in your product list, so. Go ahead.
Okay. One of the issues, he'll show you some photos.
Hang on, Dan.
Oh, that's fine.
There's folks online.
Thank you, sir.
You bet. My name is Daniel Manzanares. I'm the director of the Santa Teresa International Import-Export Livestock Facility, the largest facility in North America. We 500,000, 600,000 animals. Last year was $1 billion worth of commerce that passed through our port. This year, at this point, where we should be about 260,000, we've crossed 76,000 animals. That's it, a month and a half of what we usually cross. Usually we're crossing about 50, 55,000 a month. Anyway, but what I wanted to interject here is when you have this inspection procedure that Senacica does, initially the people they had there, that blue TB tag, they would get the dog on here and bend the damn thing and they would create the wound. They would open up a wound. So it got to USDA. It's like, ho, there's blood. Reject that animal. So those are the kind of issues we had to work through. And man, they cut a lot of animals. And people were pretty doggone upset. But that's one of the issues. Thanks, sir.
So if you talk to USDA, the rejection rate at the border has been, they say, has been the same as it's always been. It's about 3.5% to 4%, but I would tell you that that's not what's happening because most of the rejections are actually happening on the pre-export side because they know they're going to get rejected anyway. And so anything with any kind of a wound, and a lot of this has been ear tag related, then they're not going to go across. So the standard has been set pretty high. So once they're inspected, prior to that, treated with ivermectin, if they've passed all that, then they basically move to the pre-export inspection facility. And so that's, I assume on every port, it's right next door. So it's very close. And so they come there, they get their inspection, and then within 24 hours, so basically the next day, they move over to the next facility for the APHIS inspection. And those inspections are are pretty intense. And so you saw the pictures he was showing about with these folks looking at the trailer with a ladder. That's not what's happening. This is a much more intense inspection. So this is actually at Daniel's facility in Santa Teresa or San Jeronimo. Yeah, so it's on the Mexican side. This is a pre-export facility, and so you can see that this inspection is not just looking at them over the trailer. These are getting thoroughly inspected. In fact, so you got to remember, this is also tick inspection as well. And so they're not just looking for wounds, they're also looking for ticks. So they're feeling up in the flank regions, axillary regions, where they can typically find these, in the ears, anywhere, because ticks are still part of this inspection process. And so that's all happening there. The main difference is that they don't get dipped after this, because they've already been dipped several times before they got to this point.
They'll get them when USDA is inspecting. Last step.
Right before they come across. So then they get moved from the pre-export side over to the APHIS side, and very similar facility and very similar setup. It's just that now it's APHIS employees doing these inspections, whereas at the pre-export side, it was Seneca. So all professionals, all very good at what they're doing. I would contend that, you know, there's still a lot of government employee type attitudes. And so, you know, production efforts might not be as good as you and I might like to see working cattle, but they get the job done, and they're incredibly thorough. But they stop all of these animals and look them over pretty aggressively.
Individual.
Very individual. And you notice how it's all elevated quite a bit, so that they're, you know, that animal's much more on an eye level. These are not light duty inspections. This is not looking at them over a truck, ever. Then they go through the dipping vat, literally. I mean, and there's somebody standing right there when they go in that vat. And if an animal's head doesn't go underwater, then they push it underwater. They have to be completely submerged. And that poor guy has got probably the worst job in the world, because he's standing there in a rain suit and all covered up, and it's hotter than hell, and there's no way he could stay even relatively cool. But he's making sure, and then they're coming out and they'll set in a drain pen. Anybody out here remember dipping cattle at feedlots? A few of you. Yeah, most of us. Dr. Lewis, I'm sure it has, but I'm too young for that. We had one in our country for a long time. Remember who it was? Yeah, but that wasn't the last one. Bud Hills was the last one. He kept that thing going into the late 90s. In fact, I was working for Bayer at the time, and we begged and pleaded to get him to stop doing it, because we were tired of dealing with potassium levels that would develop, because he wouldn't stir his vat or treat it with all the stuff it needed to have. But they have to set in that drain pen so that most of that chemical drains off and goes back into the vat, so that it doesn't become a soil contamination issue. Then they basically come across, that's the port, or the porthole, I guess you would say. That's where the cattle go through and cross into the U.S. at this facility. And the others are fairly similar. So just to give you an idea of that.
See, there are corrientes. That's the only skinny animal that comes across. Try to breed them here in the United States. You got big bodied Leghorn. That animal right there, I used to pick up for $150. Bringing $150 right now. It's incredible.
Believe me, Daniel, I would have showed a lot better looking cattle than that, but this is the only pictures I could get my hands on.
Think that's what comes from crop.
Yeah.
And man, you get some of the best genetics in Florida, Mexico, the last 60, 70 years.
Yeah. Believe it or not, I think these come from Ben. So you'd have thought he'd have found pictures of some better cattle, but he's not paying attention to me anyway. So before this latest shutdown, we were literally in conversations with APHIS 2 days before this, and just talking through issues about possibly opening up Piedras Negras. It had basically passed all its security protocols, everything, all of the plan for all the pre-inspection, pre-export inspection facility were set up. Basically, we were just dealing with personnel issues and I mean, literally, we're working through all this. So we can't believe that it was APHIS that actually decided to shut it down, that it was Secretary Rollins and her kind of tight-knit group, you know, and they're using it for leverage. But we're also working through personnel issues. There's another port at Acuna that we think probably could get open as long as it can pass the security protocols. I guess the point I'm trying to get across is that with the right kind of inspections, there's a way to move cattle. And you think, well, why do we want to risk that? Well, I want you to think further ahead. If this thing gets here and you have cattle you want to send to a feed yard in Kansas, what do you think is going to happen if there's not an effective protocol to be able to move those cattle? Or if you got breeding cattle that you want to sell somewhere else, you know, there's got to be a protocol that works that can continue commerce. And so my point here is that I wanted everybody to see what's actually happening and understand this protocol, because it's going to affect us just as bad if it hits, say, southern Texas. And in fact, we're already working on regionalization plans, and I think Dr. Dinges will talk about that, to where maybe the entire state of Texas is not treated as a screwworm infested state once it hits Brownsville or somewhere like that. So these kind of things are important. And so part of the thing I wanted to talk to is about why are they doing what they're doing right now, and how is that working? So a big part of the plan really coincides with this line here. And so this is called the Isthmus of Tehuantepec. And I don't know that I've ever heard anybody like say, well, here's the exact line. It's probably that whole narrow region. I know that when we were hearing from folks after those last two cases, they were like, well, it's not really outside the isthmus, you know, but I guess that's all subject to anybody's opinion. But the reason this isthmus is so important is that the amount of fly production that we've got capable today, they still believe is capable of managing the disease or the infestation and keeping it beyond that. Okay, if it gets beyond that, that's when we probably start, because the way Mexico widens out, that's when we outstrip our capabilities. And so it was when this last, at least those last two cases were reported, which was, that was right before our last call. The significance of that is that it was right there on the line, or basically potentially. I've never seen the spots in Veracruz or Oaxaca, but the latest cases that had been reported were in Veracruz, which comes down into here, but they never really sit, and it goes way up. I think I've got another slide that shows. So you can see where Veracruz is there. And all they said was it was from that state, and then there was one in Oaxaca. So we've been told that they were somewhat equal, and that the one in Oaxaca was in northern Oaxaca. And so we kind of think it's somewhere in here. And so it's potentially still pretty close, but Ben, have you seen the actual locations? Nobody's ever shared that with us. Have you seen them? Where, is that about right?
You're about right on money.
Right in there?
That's when it moved the planes with
Yeah.
the flies. They've been trying to do it for like 2 months and they didn't. So now we're still behind the 8 ball, need to move them a little further north to drop them.
So this comes back to your fly drops. And so this is literally maps of the distribution of flies at a certain point in time there. And so this isn't the current map of what they're using, but they were using like 3 different distribution centers here at this time. And so one was was still down here. I don't know if that's Costa Rica or maybe Nicaragua, probably. And then one out of Honduras, and then the main one's out of Chiapas. Today, I'm fairly confident that basically everything's coming to Chiapas for this distribution center. Okay, and so coming out of that place, it was actually pretty easy for them, you know, basically right up to the narrowest part of the isthmus that they could do all these fly drops from that location. Now they've had to move those further west. And so that's creating some logistical problems, because for them to fly planes from this area right here all the way further west, they actually have to make fuel stops to be able to come back out and do all of that, because they're not just flying in one little splate. I mean, it's a lot like they're not flying a tight pattern like a spray plane you've seen flying, but they're flying a similar shaped pattern. And their fly drops vary depending on what that terrain and topography is like. And so basically what APHIS is telling us is they're dropping somewhere in the neighborhood of 3,000 to 6,000 flies per nautical mile. And that's how they make work. And so they're basically trying to cover this region. So all of this is moved up here. And so basically all of these flies, all 100 million, are coming from Panama up to Chiapas, and then that distribution center is moving them out from there. So far, we've not heard of any other reports further north. And in fact, basically all the new cases that have been reported in the last few weeks, I guess I should say, have basically been in the state of Chiapas, which is below Veracruz, which is right through there, and Oaxaca, which is coming right up. So, I mean, it's good news. I mean, it might appear like maybe they're starting to get a little better handle on it. But part of it is like he was saying, there was times where, and one of the reasons it got that, I don't know how many people paid attention to it, but there, about 2 months ago, maybe a little less, you know, Secretary Rollins threatened to shut it down if they didn't start playing ball, because we were having problems with, the contractors are having problems being able to distribute flies properly. And they were running into issues like they were trying to charge them local duties like $45,000 or something. And I don't remember how often that was, but they were trying to, it's kind of the typical Central American bribery scheme going on. It's like people are trying to get their hands on it. And that was creating some problems. And so basically when all that started happening, and the contractor basically decided to just pull out. He said, we're done with this. We're not going to mess with it anymore. It's too much trouble. And they're like, wait a minute, you know, and we got pressure in the right places, and basically that got taken care of. And so there's probably more problems that a lot of us don't even know about involved in there, but it's still being held in check as far as we can tell, right in through this region currently. If we can keep it there, then we might have a chance of not seeing it, but there's no way to know. A little bit about the sterile fly production. The plant at Copeg has been set up to basically produce 100 million flies a week. And they've made as many as 117 million flies a week. It's a fairly sensitive system, though. In fact, they had a power outage here, I don't know, 6 weeks ago, something like, maybe a little bit longer than that. But they were really producing. They'd already hit that 117 million mark, and they had a power outage. They have backup generators. It took 3 minutes for those to kick in and start things up. And the production that next week dropped to like 90 from 117. So there are significant issues if they lose power. There's a lot to one of these places. And so when it started getting up to this isthmus, that's when things started getting really serious, because they knew that if they could keep it below that isthmus, that when I say they, I'm talking about APHIS. They feel like they can keep it in check. And if it gets past that, then the estimates of what we need are somewhere in the 400 to 500 million flies a week, not 100 million. So what does that do to us? Well, right now, in fact, we got some better news just, I guess, today, that there's a fruit fly plant in Chiapas that Mexico's been talking about converting to a screwworm facility for a couple of months. Actually, they've been talking about it since January, haven't they? And so that seems to be very much in play now. USDA just put out a press release today saying that they're providing 21 million, which the money's been there all along, but it's just never had the right agreement in place. But so they're going to be converting that. They're actually saying now they think they can do 60 to 100 million out of this plant. I'm sure it's going to take some changes, but we have not gotten any kind of an idea of how long of a period of time that's going to take. I can remember asking some of those folks in sidebar conversations, and they thought 6 to 12 months to get that going, but I think it's still just a guess. It's probably pure swag. APHIS has identified a site to start up a new distribution and production facility, and that's in Mission, Texas. So USDA actually owns what used to be Moore Airfield. And so the beauty of that is that has an airport on it. And there's still functioning runways. I mean, if any of your pilots, you look it up on ForeFlight, you're just going to see this little private thing. It doesn't actually list it as a full-fledged airport, but it's still there. If you Google it and look it on maps, you'll see that it's still got all the concrete. There's actually a fruit fly plant there as well. So the good part about it is that some of the same techniques used for irradiating these flies are already in place there. And so it's, putting one of these plants together is I saw a letter the other day that somebody was putting out, they're claiming, oh, we ought to be able to do this in a couple of weeks. And I'm here to tell you that it's not going to happen. So these are the requirements. It's the significant requirements that you got to keep in mind for putting in a new plant. First of all, you got to have the water. It's kind of a non-starter. It takes a lot of water to do this. And then basically the whole area smells like death. And so you're not going to be able to just put this next to a metropolitan area because you're going to run it. And in fact, I've heard that Mission's kind of not wanting to play ball with this, but they don't really own the facility and don't really have much of a choice. But it has to be a biosecurity level 3 facility. So what does that mean? Well, it means that they cannot let that fly out of that facility without it being sterilized. And so you've got to treat it just like TVMDL would for taking in samples that might be a possible FMD. I mean, it's the same types of requirements. These things don't happen easily, nor do they happen overnight. And then, of course, they're having to handle radioactive materials. And so this is typically a cobalt process. We've also heard that there's some other technology being looked at that might not involve radioactive sterilization. There might be other ways. And so that's being looked at as well. There's some old videos that are, I don't know if they're on USDA's website, but it shows a lot of these things, but it's pretty significant process. I mean, basically they grow these things on these trays of a sludge of meat. It's like meat and blood meal, and they put it out there and they set the larvae on it, and the larvae or the eggs on it, and the larvae will develop out of that. And then eventually they grow and they fall off these trays down into these. Used to, in the very first facilities, they basically had hoppers down, and so they had grates on the floor underneath all these racks of meat slurry. And they'd drop down and they'd go into these hoppers and then go down and they'd put them in these trays of sand, let them pupate, and then take the pupa and sort them out and put them through these canisters into the radiation. And now it's a little bit different, but it's still similar technology. I mean, it's pretty fascinating. But when they're feeding on all this meat meal, it apparently is
Smells bad.
pretty bad.
Smells bad.
You don't have anything more descriptive than that?
Rendered.
Yeah, no, that's
And
pretty bad.
and it's Panama, so it's humid.
Right.
Stinks.
Right, so, this is all in process and we're pretty sure it's gonna probably happen in Mission, to make sure that we've got the capabilities again. But, none of this stuff is gonna happen. I don't care what you read, it's gonna take, I can guarantee it's gonna take a year, if not longer to get something stood up. It's not gonna be easy to do, but knowing all these facts helps you guys put pressure in the right places. Obviously, politicians sometimes need a little bit of enhancement to understand a problem. And so to me, that was one of the biggest goals in this, is that people need to understand this and understand what's going on and what's happening. And that one, cattle aren't being imported from Mexico willy-nilly. These are only coming out of basically the 5 northern states. They're not coming out of any of those areas that have had screwworm problems at this point. If they ever have a screwworm show up at one of these facilities, that includes the export gathering facility, they're shut down for 3 life cycles, which they consider to be 30 days. So you're a bare minimum of 3 months. It's cleaned up, and it's 3 months before that facility can be used again. So the requirements that are in place are pretty stringent. They did not take any of this light. It's a lot to take in a short amount of time, but I think all of this stuff can be dealt with responsibly. I think, one of our problems is the government, and our best friend is the government. I mean, the government is not fast to move, and not nearly as, we would love to see them move a lot faster and do things more efficiently. But at the end of the day, they've got the resources that most of us don't have. And so there's no way to do it without government. I've been incredibly impressed with the plans and things that Dr. Dinges is going to talk to you about. I think the state of Texas is in very good hands as far as developing plans and working on how to deal with this. And in fact, they've been working on these things for over a year. So, any questions? We have time?
I got it. So. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
All right. So 100 million flies a week, but those aren't sex flies. That's male and female 100 million. So could we potentially increase the virility of the program if we were able to sex the flies, create that? Would that be faster than creating a whole new facility? That's what I'm trying to figure out.
So
Both, but I'm saying, can we increase it significantly by just doing that?
So Josh's question is about what we really need is male flies. We don't need all. And so is there a way to enhance production and sex the flies, if you will? To my knowledge, I don't know of any way that they've developed to do that. There are some interesting things that they think they could maybe use to maybe curtail how many females live in all of that. But at the end of the day, all of their numbers are based on a total fly population. And so unless you have some way to genetically alter one to only produce males, I don't think you would actually, even if you killed all the females out of that, well, now you're putting out 50 million flies, but you're still doing what you were doing before. And so the risk, obviously, of genetically manipulating those critters is that you could change their virility and create problems that might be things you didn't intend. I've not heard anything along those respects. I mean, we've had those discussions with them, and I don't think that currently we've got that, but there's probably folks like Dr. Lohmeyer down at USDA. I mean, they've been working on stuff for years on things in that regard. And so there's probably things we don't know about that have been worked on, but I don't know of any way that, even if you could sort them, I don't know that it would really make that much difference. And in fact, those females are sterile too. And so at least they're not coming out. So when they release those, they're sterile as well. They might mate, but they're not going to actually lay any eggs. And so they don't really represent a risk right now. So I don't know what the biggest benefits, other than if we could produce 100 million males, that would be huge, because they could probably drop their fly numbers down to half of what they're doing and cover twice as much area, certainly. But I don't know how you do that. I've not heard any plan for that so far. Will?
As I understand it, we've seen quite a drop in number of cattle in feedlots up here because of the drop in imports from Mexico. And you mentioned that not all the inspection facilities and ports of entry are operational. Do we have a sense as to if those were operating at 100%, that be able to meet the demand for imported cattle?
Oh, I don't know if they'd ever meet the demand, but I can promise you that my clients would buy every one that they come across. I mean, our biggest hurdle, once we get the border reopened, assuming, so one of the other things that happened recently, in fact, the reports were out this morning. So both USDA and Mexico secretaries of ag put out releases saying that there's been agreements set up. There's a USDA's APHIS has a team of I assume probably mostly veterinarians, but there's a team of folks going to Mexico in the next week or two that'll be spreading out and teaming up with Seneca folks and going out into the field, basically to verify everything that's being done that they've been asking for. And so one of the big things that's probably been the most short of is that they didn't have very good active surveillance, and or at least they weren't providing evidence of that. And so that's really what we think has started to improve, and basically the agreements, there were actually some pretty good meetings that were held last week in DC or Zoom or however they happened. And they basically come to terms on a lot of things that they felt like were necessary to get the job done, because they're still very focused on trying to stop this where it's at. And that's where they need to be. And so once that comes, we feel like once that comes to satisfactory results, then there's potential to reopen the border and move cattle. Part of the theory is that you might as well get those cattle out of there before they become susceptible to screw fly anyway, and get them away from the zone. But I mean, there's a lot of different ways of looking at it. Everybody's got a little bit different way, but I would tell you that our brethren across those 5 northern states of Mexico are pretty important to the U.S. economy, not only from a cattle perspective, but just overall perspective. I'm not one of these one world folks, but I'm just telling you that there's probably, so last year, and this would have probably been, I remember looking the numbers up in probably by the end of September, if you went back 12 months, that we had crossed 1.5 million. And so most of those come primarily to the Panhandle of Texas and South Texas and Arizona. I mean, they don't go all that far north, although I know some people that take them fairly far north, but it's pretty significant. I mean, you figure 25 million head of feeder cattle a year, somewhere in that neighborhood. It's not an insignificant number. And so if you take 1 million head of feeder cattle out of the Southwest, you're probably going to have some packing houses closed down. So now you're talking about huge places of employment and there's going to be a lot of job losses. There's pretty significant economic impact if you do this long term. But the other side of it is that everybody needs to look at these border controls as how is that going to affect me when it gets here as well. And so if we don't have confidence in what we're doing now, then how is Oklahoma going to have confidence in taking our cattle, breeding stock, stockers, feeder cattle, whatever, you name it. And then it just goes all the way around that. You know, you start looking at, I mean, Mexico's probably in the same boat we are. They're probably going to see it pretty similar to time frame of what we do here in Texas, but Louisiana, Arkansas, Oklahoma, Kansas, those states surrounding us, they're probably going to have the same. If we don't have, confidence in what we're doing across those cattle from the northern states of Mexico, they're probably not going to have confidence to take our cattle either. So I think you got to keep all of that in perspective. JP?
What's the backup like right now as far as cattle weight costs? Just wait for the quarter. Any idea what they are? How's that going to impact?
So JP's asking about what's the reports on, how many cattle are backed up basically across the border that could potentially move across. Daniel, you got an idea? Yeah, so he says it's a little over 250,000, which I've heard estimates even higher than that, but.
Five weights, 8, 9 weights.
Yeah, that's the other problem that we're seeing is that, we typically like to get the lighter calves out of there and now we're getting a lot bigger ones. And so, that means they don't stay in the feed yard near as long. And so it all kind of rolls downhill, but there's this pretty significant number of cattle just sitting there waiting. I can remember some of the discussions about these cattle had gone to the export gathering facilities and they had already had their TB tests. And so, and then the border got shut down and their time clock back then, it was like 60 days that they had to cross. Well, it just kept going on and before they finally got it done. And then they were asked, well, I can remember somebody sitting in a meeting asking, well, what about those cattle that went back to pasture? And like, what are you talking about? It's like, well, we can't feed them in those facilities for 90 days. I mean, it's just not possible. And so they had to leave. And of course, those cattle basically just got axed. They can't cross. If they leave it, at least that was their story at the time.
For the Mexican rancher, it runs them about $125 a head freight to get to the border, freight, test, whatnot. When you're talking Chihuahua, the ones that are coming from Durango, those boys immediately freight, they had to get everything out 24 hours. And you're talking back then, it was like 5,300 head. They lost a lot of ranchers, went belly up because of that.
And roughly speaking, it's about a $500 a head win for them to sell them into the U.S. compared to selling those cattle to a feeder in Mexico. Gary.
So can we assume that this level of cooperation with Mexico has probably something to do with the embargo of those cattle coming up here? So when we allow them to come in, are we going to still be able to expect that level of cooperation?
I mean, of course, assuming anything with the government's a tough thing, but he's asking if we can assume if this level of cooperation is going to continue and whether it had anything to do with shutting the border down. Well, it had everything to do with shutting the border down. I mean, and each time we've done it, we've gotten a significantly better level of cooperation. So it could, but I think the other side of that is that once you get processes in place that I think it's pretty positive that we're sending teams down to evaluate in person what's going on so that APHIS can get significantly better feel for what they're doing. And so until we know what their report is coming back, it's hard to say whether or not we'll see a difference in that policy or not. But I don't want to get in the business of predicting policy because I would suck at it. We've had so many surprises along the way. It's every time you turn around, there's something else. I mean, I don't know how many of you, so a couple other things, I guess, from a current event standpoint. There was an article in Drover's Journal the other day. Did y'all see that? Did you read it? It's kind of ridiculous. I mean, they tried to tie it all to narco ranching, the way they called it. Did you see the article? Something along those lines, of course. And they basically tried to tie it to the new administration shutting off U.S. aid funds. Well, clearly you can see that this all started in 23. It had nothing to do with reduction in U.S. aid funds. You know, I'm not trying to get into politics, but I mean, some people, you'll see some articles out there and it's just like any media. I mean, it's a little bit surprising to see the Drover's Journal getting involved in things like that, and a little bit disappointing, but whether it had anything to do with narco ranching, I don't know. I tend to discount that as well, but there probably could have been some. I mean, we know that there's cattle coming up illegally through Central America, but those aren't the cattle coming to us. Those are going to one big packer and feeder in Mexico. So they're not coming here. Sure.
Give you a little bit of politics from that. So Kynan, that's a big feedlot operator.
I wasn't gonna say it.
That's not. That guy eats here. I don't know.
They don't eat here.
All right.
So Carne is owned by a narco, big feedlot, huge feedlot. It's in their best interest that the border stays shut. And that gentleman named Vizcarra sits down and eats dinner with the president. So that's the level of politics that's in this. That's all the southern. The northern ranchers, they get a significant amount, a bump about $500 a head to cross. When you're talking difference between 70 pesos a pound versus 380, 411 at the border for a 3-weight, you're talking a lot of money. I had a call from a rancher 3 days ago and told me I took $123,000 loss for 14 loads that I had to send to Sucatame. Now they're happy getting all this fat cattle, 8, 9 weights for nacional consumo nacional, national consumption. They're real happy with that. But the Mexican rancher in the northern states is taking the shorts. And a lot of them have gone out of business, smaller guys. That's just a fact. So as far as politics being involved, yeah, politics is very much involved in this.
I would also add that don't assume that U.S. cattlemen are always paying a discount for those calves. There's times where we're actually paying a premium for those cattle. It varies back and forth, but it's I've seen lots of times we were paying a pretty significant premium because these cattle have been through so much that they've essentially been short backgrounded, I guess I would say, and it's a little bit of a Darwinism, right? I mean, the strongest survive and move across, and so when we get those cattle, even at 380 to 500 pounds, I mean, we see.
What do you have to say now?
We see probably a quarter of the morbidity and probably even less of that of the mortality compared to that same lightweight unweaned sale barn calf coming out of say a Texas sale barn.
You're exactly right. Thumbs up. What they've been through, the weak are damaged.
They don't, the weak ones don't make it.
If you go to the sick yards, sick man and feed yards, you're gonna see very, very few Mexican cattle. It's just a fact.
I mean, at the end of the day, we buy them both. I mean, we buy the Texas cattle, we buy the Mexican cattle. I mean, they're both a big part of the business plan for most feedlots in Texas. Any other questions right now?
All right, let's take Dr. Sturgess. We'll take a short break just to get everybody's legs stretched and any biologic breaks, and we'll get started at 4:27 so we can get done a little ahead of schedule. All right, we'll get started with our last session. Just a couple quick housekeeping before we get started. All of our veterinarians, if you didn't pick up your CE certificate, grab one from the registration tables on your way out. It is 3 3/4 hours in Texas. Our online folks, give Angela, our CE coordinator, a few days to get those out to you. And we will be releasing the recording as well. So give us a few days to get those out. Any veterinarians in the room, we are having a veterinary technician CE in June. If you're interested in that, Angela has flyers at the front. So grab one of those on your way out. Without further ado, it's my pleasure to introduce Dr. Sturgess, our state veterinarian.
Thank you, Dr. Kozel. Y'all hear me okay? It's pretty loud. So, yep. Thanks for having me in Amarillo today. They may have saved the worst news or the worst speaker for last. I don't know which, but titled Prepared for the Worst and Hoping for the Best. And unfortunately, without sterile fly production at hand, we're kind of behind the 8 ball. So we've got a significant mountain to climb in our eradication and control efforts if and when we do get New World Screwworms here. So, okay, good deal. So the potential impact of New World Screwworms. We talked about numerous times today about it being eradicated from the United States in 1966. And that eradication efforts tens of millions of dollars for producer to endure. So these are some numbers here in this slide that we came up with to put in a resolution that we had passed last fall at the USAHA meeting that was forwarded on to the USDA for their review and response. So today, Freedom from the Pest provides approximately $1 billion in direct benefits to livestock producers, and then approximately $3.7 billion in benefits to the general economy annually. So, talked about eradication efforts, pushing the New World Screwworm fly back down south through Mexico, which took over 20 or 25 years, and then back down to just north of the Darien Gap there in Panama. So, talks about, Cuba, Haiti, and the Dominican Republic that New World Screwworms are endemic there. And also in South America. So from my understanding, the landscape in the Darien Gap there has changed significantly in the last few years. I believe the Colombians are coming there and taking out the forests and planting grass and grazing cattle there in the Darien Gap. So, New World Screwworms are making their way up through Central America on some illegal movements of cattle, probably, most likely. So it's a highly impactful foreign animal disease. It can be costly both financially and in loss of life in livestock. So 1935, they say that over 180,000 head of cattle in Texas were lost. And USDA came up with these figures that the annual cost of livestock producers and consumers in the U.S. is estimated at $540 million today. And then the cost to eradicate New World Screwworms from the U.S. is estimated at $1.27 billion. And that's today's dollars. So increased cost of production, obviously one of them is the death loss in animals, decreased livestock production, you get a New World screwworm infestation, you're gonna need increased veterinary costs in their services and increased need for medication and insecticides as well. So labor and vehicle costs for the inspection and treatment of cattle. I don't know that we have the number of cowboys and number of horses that we're going to be needing to treat livestock on our ranches today if we get New World screwworm infestation. So I talked to one ranch in South Texas. They used to have 30 cowboys on the payroll back when New World screwworms were here before, and they checked cattle from daylight to dark, and now they have 4 full-time cowboys on the payroll. So lots of work ahead. So cost of eradication, obviously the public education and producer education is involved. Money to research more effective treatment. There are, products that are on the market in South America that aren't approved for use here in the United States. So hopefully we can bring some of those products to the United States and put those to use if we get New World screwworms. So surveillance activities very important in the eradication and control of New World screwworms, sterile insect technique expenditures. That's where we're behind the 8 ball. We do not have a facility. They've talked about it earlier in today's program that the only production facility we have is in Panama. So we're at unfortunately we're kind of at the northern zone, if you will, of them being able to fly those pupae and flies up here to be distributed. So the viability of those flies decreases the further distance they have to fly them. So one thing we're up against there as well. So redirecting personnel from other disease programs and activities, that's one thing in regulatory veterinary medicine that we have to deal with if we have a disease outbreak in the United States. So in 1976, I look back at some of the commission meeting minutes. Have there in this New World screwworm outbreak in 1972 and 1976. I haven't made it through the 72 minutes just yet, but I looked at 19. There were 173 affected counties in the state of Texas at that time. And there were close to 15,000 reported cases, 14,800 some odd cases that were reported in those 173 states. Keep in mind that we had a production facility in Texas that was producing 200 sterile flies a week. And these are some of the production losses that were estimated at that time, $132 million. The death loss was the most significant expense or item on that list. The extra labor, 35%. Animal weight loss, fuel, vehicle expense, medication, insecticides. And then you got horse and feed expense. Like I mentioned earlier, I don't know that we have the horses and the cowboys today that we need to dock screwworm infestations. Just some breakdowns and looking at the economics of the 1976 outbreak. They've got the cattle population at that time at over 7 million head. You plug in 12.2 million head today. Obviously, these estimates, they adjusted the 1976 values for inflation only. And you can see the cattle cost per case there would probably be double or triple that today in today's dollars and today's price. You see over here talks about the $9.6 billion cost or economic windfall for the Texas hunting economy. That's one thing we haven't seen from Mexico is surveillance and wildlife, and we've asked for that on a weekly basis. We've yet to hear any numbers or figures on the surveillance and the wildlife there. So if we get it here in the United States, it's going to affect life obviously, and it's going to be really hard to combat. So protocols. how we're treating cases right now, we get a report of suspicious wounds or maggot infested wounds from veterinarians or producers. We're treating it as a foreign animal disease investigation, and we're issuing it a foreign animal disease number with the USDA. So we've sent out some guidance documents to veterinarians and producers alike. And this is kind of what we're asking the veterinarians to do and guiding them to do to submit samples. And we can certainly walk the veterinarians through this process. And in some cases, or if it's a producer that's calling in, we'll send one of our inspectors or veterinarians out to get the samples. But just keep in mind, there are several flies associated with wounds, and they're not all, they're a blowfly, but they could be a secondary screwworm fly or have you. So, but always want to keep in mind that the New World Screwworm fly living tissues. So just want to make sure veterinarians remember that. And well, most important, this is a portable disease. We put out these guidance documents to 5,400 veterinarians that are USDA type 1 and type 2 category accredited with the USDA. So we've gotten that put out, and also 2,700 of our Texas Authorized Personnel Program participants, veterinarians, we've pushed out these documents to them as well. So keep in mind that these fly larvae or these flies are not going to just lay their eggs in a fresh wound. There's also potential for them to lay the eggs in mucous membranes associated with eyes, with the nose, with the ears, the mouth, any external genitalia. So always want to keep in mind that if you're inspecting an animal, examining an animal for screwworm infestations. So our sample protocol collection, these are just items that vets should have in their vet clinic. We're going to put together some sample collection vials or packets like Dr. Womack had talked earlier, the Seneca or the what they Copeg distributed in South America or Panama, but we're going to get some of those put together. We've got some, I think, NAD prep funds. IAD there at A&M's got some NAD prep funds, and we're going to try to put quite a few of those sample collection canisters and kits together to get those distributed. But now we're still going to manage each individual case that comes in that's reported. We're going to address them as a foreign animal disease investigation and address it in that manner. So collection procedures that you definitely want to get down deep in the wound and collect larvae from different spots within that wound. You put them in the containers with alcohol, make sure that they are submerged in the alcohol. So submitting the samples, like I said, veterinarians or producers can call in, and I'll give you at the end of the presentation, we've got our numbers and contact information for our region offices and our central office. The veterinarians or producers can call in during normal business hours, or we've got a vet on call 24/7 after hours and on the weekends that they can call in and their concerns about a suspicious wound or a wound with maggots. There's a form that we have to submit with the samples. It's a VS 5-38, and we can get that on off the internet. And any submission package that we put out there will have that form in the canister. We talk about treatment of livestock and wounds and myiasis, and that I can't stress enough that without sterile flies to distribute the treatment of these wounds and the larvae that are in these wounds are very important. Want to make sure clean out with soap and water and disinfectant, want to wash it out and rinse it out and get all the larvae and the eggs out and then you can treat systemically. There aren't any approved products, but there are some products, some macrocyclic lactones that have been mentioned today, ivermectin and endoromectin, that you can treat the animal systemically, that you would get some protective efficacy for from the development of the larvae in those wounds. And like I mentioned, early detection and reporting is critical due to the fact that we do not have sterile flies to distribute. So don't, if you see an animal that it's going to be pretty important that our Texas Parks and Wildlife folks, and we'll talk more about what we've been doing with them here in a minute, but it's important that those animals are dispatched and those wounds are treated or tended to. And obviously, you want to take care of the carcass if you do dispatch animal. So preparedness efforts, they talked about APHIS and internet earlier. So international services, I guess, formed an incident command in the effort to eradicate the screwworms in Central America. They're back, I guess, probably May of last year. And they were working with COPEG to get the flies distributed to the country there in Central America. Along there, and you know, the flies made their way to Mexico, and I guess March of the year, the APHIS Veterinary Services took over the control of that program, and they turned it into incident management response, which they're thinking they're going to be in it for the long haul for 8 to 10 years or more. So APHIS Veterinary Services, we've been deal with them on a daily basis. You know, they're managing the response now. They've got 2 strike teams developed, one for the Southeast United States and one for the Southwest United States. They had a training down at the Moorfield Air Base with some of their entomologists and other folks back in the first part of May, that we were fortunate enough to have I believe 4 people, 3 inspectors, and then, or 3, a couple of veterinarians and inspectors. And then we had our emergency management director participate as an observer. So fortunate to go through that training with them. They're refining the FAD prep. They flashed it up a while ago. The FAD prep, the green book, if you call it, the new World Screwworm Response Manual. They're in the process of refining that, and then we're working closely with them to response protocols and plans and quarantine protocols and treatment protocols as well. So we'll talk more about those here in a minute. And then identifying the locations for sterile fly production in the United States. They a production facility in Arizona that they produce sterile moths for the cotton boll weevil eradication program. That facility was not going to be sufficient. So they went back down to Moorfield Air Base there at Mission, Texas. There is a airplane hangar there that they think that they can convert into a distribution center for the pupae, that they can fly them up from Panama and store them there for a day or 2 and then distribute them out as needed. Like they've mentioned, that facility only produces 100 billion flies a week. So I've heard of estimates needing where the flies have been in Mexico there of 200 million flies a week production to get them stopped just right there at the Isthmus of Tehuantepec and get them pushed back down to Central America and Panama. But if they get too much further north of the Isthmus of Tehuantepec there, the land mass is going to start spreading out, and we're obviously going to need more fly production to stop the spread. So that's kind of what we're up against there. There is a footprint there at Moorfield that they said that's large enough to build a production facility. I'm thinking that production facilities would take probably more like 18 months to 2 years to get put in, to get put in place before we would see some production out of it. So that's if they started today. Talked about the airplane hangar cost for that production facility. We've heard estimates of $650 to $700 million. I know there have been some appropriation bills or thoughts that I think they're asking for 300 million or 350 million. So, pretty significant price tag, but we're talking food safety and national defense here as far as that goes, in my opinion. So, it well spent. Agricultural Research Service, they're down at Copeg. They have a part of that facility there where they monitor the strain effectiveness of the strain of flies that they developed. There was a new strain developed back earlier, and I believe they put that into use in August of 2024. So they've got boots on the ground down there monitoring the effectiveness of the new strain of fly. We're lucky that they help us on a daily basis with our cattle fever tick eradication efforts there in South Texas. And they've been very helpful in our work with the New World Screwworm threat. So we've got one of our epidemiologists now in our preparations, our plans for our treatment protocols. So we've got one of our staff epidemiologists now that's working on a list with the ARS, Dr. Lohmeyer there. So they're going to get that list put together for all species of animals that we deal with, and they're going to submit that to the FDA and the USDA for their approval. So that's in the works. Hopefully we'll have something in the next week or two for that to be distributed to FDA and to USDA, but since it's all extra label drug use, we have to consult. You would think we wouldn't have to, but we're having to consult with FARAD to get some residual or residue data and withdrawal data from them on those drugs. So we are working on that. So I know producers are chomping at the bit to get some information on what they can do to treat. So it's in the works, and I ask for your patience and understanding there. So preparedness efforts continued. All of our livestock inspectors, our veterinarians, along with the federal VMOs and federal animal health technicians have been trained in wound inspection and sample collection, and as well as treatment goes. So I talked about the IAD there at A&M. They do have some DAD prep funds where we're going to distribute or assemble and distribute the sample collection kits. But I think right now we're going to, until we get just inundated with New World screwworms, we're going to rely on our agency or the USDA VMOs to collect those samples or be involved to a high degree with those sample collections or sample submissions. But we're going to work on these sample collection kits and have those on hand in case we need to distribute them. So we do work with Avis on a daily basis, as I mentioned. We do have a good working relationship with our Texas in charge, Dr. Collin. So there's agency and external working groups working on the response efforts. Our emergency management staff has been working for months now on this. We've been reviewing policy and regulations that we have on the books. Talked about historical data there and perspectives. We've got a inspector that's worked for the agency since 1972, and we reached out to him and talked to him about the response back in the 70s. He said they would go out and inspect the animals, and they had a 50-pound bag of chalk or lime like you would chalk a sports field, football field, or baseball field. And they would put a big 30-foot X on the ground where the airplane could see it flying over to distribute flies. So, but just keep in mind, back then they had a production there on the southern border that was producing 200 million flies a week. So, and they were in 76, they were distributing flies all over South Texas, up into Northeast Texas. I think they shipped or distributed flies up into Oklahoma and Arkansas as well. So that's one leg of the stool that we do not have. So like I said, we're trying to develop response plans as far as the treatment goes. You know, we talked about sterile insect technique and sterile flies being the most important leg in the stool. So we're gonna, like I mentioned earlier, we're look at drugs and medications that we can use, and hopefully we'll get some approved by the FDA. Hopefully they may be able to bring in some of those drugs from South America where there are drugs approved for screwworm treatment, and maybe get those put into some of the treatment protocols. So without the sterile flies, the other two important legs of the stool are surveillance and movement control. And those are going to be very important, our control of the northern movement of New World screwworms. And it's going to take effort from everybody, not only the regulatory veterinary medicine folks, but producers and wildlife folks alike. So I don't have any slides of our control protocols up here, or I'm just going to try to explain them. And we're going to treat it like any other foreign animal disease outbreak control areas. And we're going to base those control areas and surveillance areas off of the flight distance of a New World screwworm fly, which is anywhere from 6 miles to 12 miles. So we were going to start out with first of all, we're going to start at the county level. If we get a report of a screwworm somewhere in Texas, we're going to go and set up checkpoints at major thoroughfares, coming through the county, highways, Horn of Market roads, larger county roads, just to kind of get an idea of what livestock animals are moving, companion animals as well, companion animal issue also. So we got to keep that in mind. So if we get a report of a screwworm or confirmation of screwworms, we're going to drill down to that index premises and go out miles and make a circle around that. And then we're going to go out another mile that. So in that first control area, we're going to do some pretty heavy surveillance and inspection of animals. Might be that we need to stop movement of animals out of that 6.2 miles. Could be that we need to stop movement for animals out of the 12.4 miles. But that would be just temporarily, just till we kind of get a grasp on how bad the situation is. Because I think our first effort at stopping this infestation is going to be our best effort. So that's what we're kind of thinking right now. We need to, share that with some other producer groups and just get their ideas, but it's going to rest heavily on where the infestation is. If it's in Hereford, Texas, obviously we've got feed yards and dairies around there within the 24-mile diameter circle. Those animals are looked at 2 and 3 times a day. So we're going to take all of that in consideration. If there's a cell barn within the control area or the surveillance zone, we're going to take that in consideration as well. So main thing is controlling animal movement and doing good surveillance. And in the surveillance area, we're going to be doing surveillance in the control area where we're going to be inspecting cattle or horses or other livestock. But we're also going to be doing surveillance, setting out traps, looking for adult flies. So that's kind of our plan there. We're trying to get that put together. We've got a national assembly with other state veterinarians put together a working group. We meet with them once a week to kind of go through this plan we have. Obviously, we're gonna try to have a united plan, and we want to, have a plan that these other states are gonna agree to. So what we're gonna try to strive for is having a, regionalization in the state. If we get screwworms in South Texas, we don't want to impede the movement of dairy cows from the panhandle, cattle going to slaughter out of state from the feed yards. We got up in the panhandle, those cattle need to go to the Midwest to be processed. So, those pigs need to go to the Midwest to be processed. So, just a lot of moving parts and pieces. We're going to get one plan together, present that to the USDA. And we just want to make sure that these other states are all on board. We have what they will require for our animals moving into their state. Make sure we're all on the same page. That way we're not trying to do all this in wartime. So blue sky days, we're going to get all that worked out and make sure we're all on the same page and make sure we can continue commerce or the continuity of business, even though we might be affected in another state. But regionalization is going to be heavy on our ability to do inspections and surveillance. And, cattle can move out of these control areas, or livestock can move out of these control areas. It's just got to be inspected, and we've got to use something to treat them with. And we're going to base our kind of protocol off of what they're doing in Mexico, on cattle coming out of Mexico. So that's kind of what our plan is there, because I want to assure these other states that we're doing our due diligence and doing all we can to stop the spread of New World screwworms, because I don't want to be responsible for sending it to another state. So that's kind of our plan right now. I can answer more questions about that in a minute, but that's just kind of what we're thinking. I would rather have that approved by the USDA and all of us be on the same page before I put that out to producers and industry groups. So communications, Dr. Lanchard, the Assistant State Veterinarian, he's been working on this, I think 24/7, New World screwworms since March of 2024, and has done a great job and couldn't do it without him, obviously, but we've developed communication guides for producers, veterinarians alike, fact sheets that we're sending out to producers, public on New World screwworms. We collaborate with the USDA on their information distribution efforts. Dr. Lanchard been doing quite a few presentations for extension folks. He was at College Station earlier today doing some presentations on screwworms for the AgriLife folks. We've been in contact with some county governments. We do have really good working relationships with emergency management folks in each county, and our inspectors have a really good relationship with the livestock deputies in those counties. So we're trying to bring them up to speed as to what we're thinking in a response effort. We've had some industry meetings, had some roundtable discussions. We've done some presentations to other states to kind of bring them up to speed on what our efforts have been to date as far as New World screwworm control and eradication go. So our communications director, Erin Robinson's done a great job. She has a call every 2 weeks with the state partners here, A&M, Parks and Wildlife, Texas Department of Agriculture, Texas Racing Commission, Department of State Health Service, and the Department of Emergency Management. So we've been trying to keep them apprised of the situation, keep them aware of what's going on. Industry partners there, sheep and goat raisers should be on there. They're not on there though, but those are the industry partners we've been having our communications director reach out to and having calls each or every other week with them. Like I mentioned, we've got the NASAHO working group. We're trying to solidify these response protocols and treatment protocols with, and making sure we can ship our to their state without any issues. haven't had I've had some discussions with USDA about regionalization, and we hadn't finalized anything yet, but I'm certain that it's gonna, deal with how well we can do surveillance and animal control, movement control. So that's gonna be a really big part of that. So we're gonna have a joint meeting there at our office in Austin on the 17th. We're gonna send some invites out later this week. But we're gonna try to bring in our state agencies, response partners, and then all of our industry groups that we deal with, and just have a meeting and get everybody on the same page. I know there's been some information disseminated out about different feed companies around the state that probably hadn't been, really kind of stirred up quite a bit of a hornet's nest there in some areas. But anyway, so hope to have some meetings with producer groups in the coming weeks to months. Make sure everybody's on the same page. Obviously need to alter some production practices and need to get them up to speed. In addition to what information pieces we put out and guidance documents we put out to them already, but make sure they're on target for reporting any suspicious wounds or maggot-filled wounds that they might see. And then surveillance and response, like I said, we've been engaged with Texas or AgriLife Extension, Texas Parks and Wildlife. They've been a part of our discussions and meetings. We have a big meeting once a week with all of our state response partners. We had one of the veterinarians at one of our inspector trainings last week down in Laredo. I was down there for a day. And then we spent today and tomorrow training quite a few game wardens and game biologists for Texas Parks and Wildlife. So while we have the authority to quarantine areas that are infested with screwworms, Parks is going to be probably they will be the lead agency as far as white-tailed deer and wildlife go. So it's important that they address any animal that has a wound, and like I said, the treatment of wounds or treatment of animals that if they need to be dispatched and the carcass dealt with properly, well then they'll have to tend to that. So some preparedness gaps that we've dealt with or continue to deal with, movement control and inspections. Like I said, we've got a working group formed with other states. I want to make sure that we can move animals or livestock interstate without an issue. And then, of course, what's the USDA going to allow us to do as far as regionalization goes? So treatment strategies, who's responsible? Will they be supported by or funded by the government? I'll tell you now, probably not. It's probably going to be up to the producer to deal with that. So heaven forbid we get New World Screwworms and have to deal with, treat animals for that prophylactically. Hopefully there'll be some sort of ELAP funds one of these days, but nothing's guaranteed. So sterile fly production, what alternatives do we have? We've talked about some different macrocyclic lactones that are available, growth inhibitants. There's a company that can make a vaccine possibly against the larvae development. So those are just some of the gaps that we've dealt with along the way and dealing with on a daily basis to prepare for this fight that lies ahead. So efforts you can do or take now, obviously you want to monitor your animals and livestock for flies, myiasis or any secondary infections that they might have from New World Screwworm infection. Keep open wounds clean and covered if you can. Obviously treat clothing and gear and people with proper repellents, and ensure animals and vehicles are inspected before. And probably the most important part, do not move an infested or infected animal. So that's coming to the end of my presentation there. These are regions that we have, 6 of them around the state. Their contact information there. Like I said, you can reach out to us 24/7. We do have a vet on call after hours and on the weekends to take calls and address any urgent situations. So there's some additional information, some links you can download for some more information on New World Screwworm. So I appreciate it, and I'll take any questions you might have.
All right, we got quite a few questions online, so if you don't mind, we'll go through some of those. Can you talk about how prevalent screwworm is in birds, and can it be spread by infected birds? So the question, one question specifically asked about buzzards.
I would think that birds are a susceptible host. They did find screwworms in a hawk on a game reserve in southern Mexico. So obviously, if that animal's injured, the flies would be attracted to it, and definitely a viable host if they're injured in some way.
Yeah. Can you speak to any education being done with harvest facilities in the event an animal is observed at antemortem inspection?
We have not addressed that issue, but we will, that will be part of our.
On your list.
On the list.
Right. Have they stopped pet movement of pets in and out of Mexico? Or are they requiring a parasiticide?
So they have to be, companion animals have to be inspected by an accredited Mexican veterinarian 5 days prior to being presented at the southern border, and they have to travel with the certificate of veterinary inspection.
How different will the updated prep guidelines be compared to 2018?
I haven't seen those revisions from the USDA yet. I think they're going to look at our proposed protocols and maybe combine the two or add those to the FAD prep document.
Very good. And one kind of final, multiple questions were asked about this. How long can you expect screwworms to be on a dead animal, and what is the best way to dispose of dead animals?
If they're a screwworm infested animal, probably incineration is the best way to deal with those carcasses. I do not know how long that they will, the larvae will stay on a recently deceased animal. A couple of hours, maybe, I don't know, but we definitely need to incinerate the animal or debride the wound and remove all the larvae and eggs and make sure that they're non-viable and disposed of properly. So we don't want those getting into the soil and pupating. So.
All right, there's a lot of questions, but hopefully that hits some of the more common ones. Well, you can see what questions we have from the audience. Sarah Beth, did you have one? Any other questions? Oh.
I guess I'm close enough. I want to ask a question. You said a vaccine might be effective. How in the world would a vaccine be effective?
Yeah, I think they can look at the genetic sequence of the screwworm fly and develop a vaccine based off of that, is my understanding. That would potentially
That's what I've seen. It's not overly promising. It reduces the size of the larva, but there's still evidence, still impressed. They theorize that it makes the infestations less severe, possibly to reduce the numbers that develop into adults, but from a true practical means of what we're dealing with here, even to time to develop it, obviously you have to have realistic expectations, but what they've seen, at least on old world screwworm of different genus and species, this is my personal opinion, but it's not overly impressive.
Yeah, so for those online, Yeah, for those online, there was some discussion in the room about vaccinating for New World Screwworm, and there was discussion about Old World Screwworm, and how efficacious the vaccine was there. So, Any other questions?
Appreciate your presentation there. I know the state vets is in terms of the Texas, New Mexico, Arizona, California, the states that border Mexico. I know y'all have been in very close contact.
You bet.
And y'all seem to work pretty well together.
Great.
I'm assuming you work pretty well
You bet.
together on certain issues. This could be a little bit more contentious as we take cattle south to north, whether it's to Oklahoma or to Kansas or Nebraska or Colorado or something along those lines. And my question is I'm just curious to know, because from a protocol perspective, it's hugely important that we all be on the same page.
Right.
We've learned that with our relationship with Mexico,
You
that
bet.
we can't handle not being 1000% on the same page. So I'm just
So
curious about
our
that.
thought right now is to treat those animals, inspect them, treat them prophylactically, let them sit for 3 to 5 days, inspect them again, and then if, ship them to the state with the document that they've been treated, inspected and treated, and it may require a entry permit from that state. That way that they know that the animals are coming and that they can verify their arrival and put them under a hold order or whatever, whenever they get there, if they need to inspect them. But I think that's kind of what we're thinking now in our discussions with other states right now. That's kind of what we're leaning towards.
And I'm assuming that's for feeder cattle. What about live cattle that go from Texas to Liberal, Kansas?
If they're not going to slaughter, well, then they would need to be treated, inspected and treated prophylactically, and then, held for 3 to 5 days. Let the drug build up tissues, concentrations, and then they can be inspected and shipped north. We've looked at, animals that are going to slaughter or whatever, using some product like epinephrine, Horon, that has 0 withdrawal time. Maybe using that or a permethrin spray. We'll have to check with USDA to make sure, or see what they recommend, but that's kind of what we're thinking right now.
Thank you.
Yes, sir. We just want to make sure the animals are inspected and treated and assure the receiving state that we've done our due diligence and trying to prevent the spread of World Screwworms into their state. So.
There's quite a few questions about preventative medication. And so you talked a little bit about that, but it's not been released, those numbers.
Not yet. We're working with it with ARS, and we'll submit that to FDA and USDA and let them look at it and get their approval. And then I would rather that document be delivered by them and with their approval.
Right. Yeah. People are very interested to see if long range, if it makes any difference to anybody. You mentioned incineration of carcasses. How effective is composting carcasses in reducing the spread of screwworm?
I would think you would need to take care of the viable larvae and eggs that are on that carcass and make sure that they're dealt with in the proper manner before you compost a carcass that's, hasn't been infected with screwworms.
Lots of questions about prophylactics and things like that. So I'm sure ARS will take this into consideration, but possible parasite resistance once we start using.
One thing that we are concerned with, we use doramectin as part of our cattle fever tick eradication program in South Texas. So that's one thing that we're concerned about, if injecting that and livestock on a regular basis, every 21, 28 days, don't want to build up resistance to it, definitely.
Right. And then we'll do one last question. So does Texas Animal Health have the authority to quarantine an area based solely on wildlife detections?
We have the authority to quarantine any area where there are susceptible animals to New World screwworms that may affect livestock. So yes, we can put those under quarantine.
Hopefully that answered most of the questions. I tried to group large, very similar questions together. We have lots of questions online and we'd be here all night answering these. So hopefully that gets big ones. Any questions from the audience?
Yes, I have one more.
Hold on, you got to talk into the mic or Dr. Lansford is gonna get Dr. Dingus and I from afar.
And I don't know, this may be slightly outside of your scope, but maybe just an opinion on your part. I know I serve on the FSA County Committee in Duff Smith County. And was just in a meeting this morning with some of our state level officials. Cuts to that agency on the state level have been about 30%. So I would assume that other agencies within the USDA probably have seen similar cuts through targeted termination and the voluntary DRP programs put forth by the Doge group. Do you have confidence in USDA's ability to help Texas in the fight against this?
So we
invasive?
haven't, that I'm aware of. I think we may have lost one federal VMO in Texas. We've got 15 here. I know they've got the ability to hire more veterinarians and more staff at the ports of entry. So yeah, I mean, yeah, they're one of our response partners and we deal with them every day, all day long. So yeah, I have confidence in them. So.
Perfect, thank you.
Yeah.
All right. I think we're all good, all done. So thank you. Join me in thanking Dr. Dingus. Thank you all for coming. Thank you all for joining us today. Thank you to all that are still on Zoom. Like I said, we'll be sending out the recording in a few days, any C certificates for our online veterinarians that joined us today. So thank you.